What if I told you that the common foot soldier in the 100 Years' War had a life expectancy shorter than that of a houseplant? Sounds absurd, right? Yet, here lies the grim joke: medieval life was a deadly game of survival where the stakes were as high as the stench of rot on the battlefield. You think your job is bad? Try standing knee-deep in mud, dodging arrows that whistle like demented banshees while your commander screams orders with the grace of a rabid squirrel. Do you fancy yourself brave? You would need more than courage. You needed a thick skin, a twisted sense of humor, and an iron stomach. Welcome to a life where your best meal is a day-old hunk of bread, and your worst, a face-to-face encounter with a fellow soldier's festering wound. Picture this: you're freezing in the rain, caked in grime, clutching a weapon that's probably seen more action than you have, because let's face it, you're not even sure if you'll survive to see the next sunrise. And loyalty? It's a two-edged sword. You'd march into battle, certain of your cause, only to watch your comrades fall, one by one, like marionettes severed from their strings. The enemy didn't just want to kill you, they wanted to obliterate your very soul, leaving you a hollow shell, a mere shadow of the man you once were. Remember that noble cause you signed up for? Forget it. The lords were sipping wine in their castles while you were left to trudge through the muck and mire like a human mop. But wait, there's more. Ever heard of the cheerful company of mercenaries? They were nothing more than glorified thugs, underpaid and overworked, scrounging for scraps like feral dogs. One minute you're laughing over a stale pint, and the next, you're throwing your lot in with the very men who would stab you in the back for a slice of bread. Trust was a luxury, and betrayal was the norm. The battlefield wasn't just a field, it was a hellscape, a theater of the absurd where madness reigned supreme. When the trumpets blared, it wasn't a rallying cry, it was a death knell, the last laugh of fate mocking your existence. Each clash of steel was a reminder, a promise that life was precarious, and glory was just a glittering mirage on the horizon. And yet, amid the chaos, gallows humor thrived. Soldiers would joke about their impending doom as if laughter were the only weapon they had left. What did the archer say to the knight? One would quip. You're about to get skewered, hope you brought your armor. The absurdity was their solace, their small act of rebellion against the relentless tide of despair. So, why would anyone willingly don the rags of a foot soldier? Because in a world drenched in blood, sometimes, the only thing worse than being a pawn is watching from the sidelines, knowing your fate lies in the hands of others. And as you stand there, caught in the crossfire of ambition, greed, and the sheer madness of it all, you start to wonder, was it ever worth it? The night was thick, a damp blanket smothering the village. The only sound was the cracking of the old wooden door, its rusty hinges screaming as if begging for mercy. I stood there, my heart pounding, the weight of the world perched precariously on my shoulders. Shadows danced around the flickering flame of a lone candle, illuminating the faces of those who dared to gather. Fear was palpable, clinging to us like the fog that rolled in from the hills, enveloping every whispered hope and silent prayer. I can't. I won't. Clara's voice cut through the tension like a blade, trembling yet fierce. Her eyes were wild, aflame with defiance. But her brother, Thomas, sat across from her, fists clenched, his knuckles white against the rough-hewn table. He was a ragged reflection of the man he could be, one foot already on the battlefield, the other still tethered by the love for his sister. The weight of the choice pressed upon him, heavy as a soldier's pack, suffocating. The kingdom needs us, Thomas replied, words strained, each syllable like a stone dropped into a still pond. If I don't go, they'll come for you. They'll come for all of us. His voice cracked, a taut string on the verge of snapping. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, the silent battle raging within, clawing at his heart. Clara's breath hitched. But what if you don't come back? What if you die out there? I can't lose you, Thomas. I refuse. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, a mournful lament for the lives that would soon be lost. In that moment, time stood still, and the air crackled with the electricity of impending decision. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in, absorbing our despair, the quiet whispers of longing, regret, and the haunting echo of duty. I remember how it felt, the fear of being conscripted, the pressure from those who looked at you with pleading eyes, as if your courage could save them all. I had seen it before, the way they turned to their commoners for salvation, their voices trembling with unspoken promises. The recruiters would arrive like specters, their presence casting a pall over the village, as if they heralded the end of days. The day they came for Thomas was just like this, a night ripe with dread. I remember the way he stood, shoulders squared, chest puffed out like a rooster ready to fight, yet underneath, a fragile boy pulsed with uncertainty. He might have laughed it off, tucked away in his dreams of heroism, but the weight of the sword he was offered hung heavily in the air, each glimmering blade a reminder of mortality. "You'll be a hero," they said, their voices slick with honeyed promises, as if valor could be sold like bread at the market. "Your name will be sung in the halls of kings." But in that moment, all Thomas could hear was the silence of the dead, the ghosts of those who had marched off and never returned, their faces a collection of regrets etched in memory, shadows that haunted the edges of our thoughts. And Clara, oh, Clara! I felt the fierce love she held for her brother, a love that twisted and turned like the roots of the trees surrounding our village, stubborn and unyielding. Her heart thudded like war drums, resonating with the cries of mothers who had lost sons, the wives who had watched their husbands disappear into the maw of battle, never to return. She was a storm, a tempest of emotion, and it threatened to drown them both. "I can't let you do this," she whispered, voice breaking, shattering under the weight of despair. "They'll use you as cannon fodder, Thomas. You're not a hero, you're my brother." But the call of duty was a siren song, a melody laced with tragedy and hope. It lured him in, promising him a place in the annals of history, yet beneath the surface, the truth lay coiled like a serpent, ready to strike. I watched as the tension mounted, the clock ticking louder, counting down the moments until the recruiters would return, until the choice would be taken from them entirely. "Remember the stories," he finally said, his gaze piercing through the veil of fear. "The ones about the brave men who fought for their people. They were just like us, Clara. Just commoners." I remember the taste of that word, commoners, bitter on my tongue. It echoed in my mind, a reminder of the chains that bound us. We were mere pawns on the chessboard of war, our lives expendable, our dreams crushed beneath the weight of swords and shields. It felt like a cruel joke, a dark comedy played out in the shadows of our lives. The candle flickered, shadows leaping, twisting as if they were aware of the brewing tempest. Around us, the others in the room seemed to fade, their fears and hopes blending into the background, mere ghosts in the face of the storm. It was just Clara and Thomas now, the two of them locked in a dance of love and desperation, each step bringing them closer to a precipice. "I remember you as a child, Thomas," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "With your wooden sword, dreaming of adventure. But this isn't an adventure. It's a death sentence." And there it was, the crushing reality, the moment that shattered the illusion of glory. A jagged breath pulled through me as I stood on the sidelines, feeling like an intruder in their private sorrow. Each word was a knife, twisting deep, pulling at the heartstrings until the sorrow was unbearable. But then, like thunder rolling across a stormy sky, the voice of authority pierced through the moment. The recruiters. They were here, cloaked in shadows, faces hidden, bodies looming like the specters of our fears. They entered with the practiced grace of wolves among sheep, their very presence a proclamation that the time for choices was over. The air changed, thickening with the weight of what lay ahead. Clara grasped Thomas's hand, their fingers intertwined, a desperate tether against the storm that threatened to tear them apart. I could feel the heat of their shared breath, the anxious energy humming between them, thick with emotion and dread. And at that moment, I realized a choice had been made. Not just by Thomas, but by all of us, forged in that dark and desperate hour. The battle lines had been drawn, not in the soil of fields, but in the very marrow of our being. Commoners, united in fear, bound by love, faced with a world that demanded sacrifice. A chill ran down my spine as the echoes of their fate loomed ever closer, the shadow of war sweeping through our lives like a thief in the night. For in that hut, beneath flickering candlelight, amidst the cries and whispered prayers, we stood on the brink of despair and hope, ready to face whatever awaited us in the darkness. The sun dipped low, dragging shadows across the cobblestone streets of the town, a cloak of creeping dusk settling over the rooftops. I stood there, a silent observer, feeling the chill creep into my bones as if it were a living creature slithering toward me. The marketplace had emptied, the laughter and bargaining now ghosts whispering in the wind. I remember the smell of damp earth mixed with the sharp tang of iron from the smithy, a scent so ordinary yet so heavy with the weight of inevitability. I was a peasant, a nameless face in a crowd, and every morning I awoke to the same stark reality, the unforgiving grind of survival. Bread was scarce, and the bounty of the field seemed a distant memory, fading with every season. The other villagers went about their routines, their faces etched with worry, despair painted in every crease of their brows, as if the very air was thick with fate's oppressive hand. I remember how we exchanged glances, the unspoken words hanging between us like the heavy hangman's noose. Then there was Alaric, a townsman with a heart as torn as the rags he wore. His laughter was a rare bird, fluttering through the gloom, a sound that felt almost sacrilegious amidst our despair. I remember watching him, how he would swagger through the streets as if the weight of the world couldn't crush him underfoot. He'd wink at the baker's daughter, a bright smile that could crack the coldest of hearts, but the shadows of his father's debts loomed over him like a spectre. I felt a pang of envy and admiration every time he threw caution to the wind, chasing fleeting joys while I was tethered to the earth, bound by unyielding responsibilities. And then there was Isolde, a woman with a spirit that burned fiercely, illuminating the dark corners of our little town. Her hands were calloused, worn down from toil, yet she cradled the earth as if it were a child, nurturing whatever life she could coax from the soil. I often found her kneeling by her garden, whispering secrets to the growing plants as if they were the only audience she could trust. I remember the way her eyes flared with determination, a flame that refused to be snuffed out by the encroaching shadows. She dreamed of distant lands, of freedom far beyond the borders of our small existence, but her dreams felt like wading through quicksand. The harder she fought to escape, the deeper she sank. One night, the air crackled with tension. A storm brewed on the horizon, the wind howling like a banshee, foretelling the chaos to come. The townsfolk gathered at the tavern, voices raised in a cacophony of fears and hopes, each soul grappling with the weight of impending doom. The walls echoed with laughter and despair, a strange dance of emotions that felt almost surreal. I remember Alaric standing on a table, his arms flailing as he recounted tales of glory in distant lands, his words a potent elixir that made us forget, if only for a moment, the grim spectre of war looming ever closer. But then, as if summoned by his bravado, a messenger burst through the door, breathless and pale, the message clutched in his trembling hands. A chill swept through the crowd, a silence so profound it felt like a knife slicing through the air. We all held our breaths, the world narrowing to the pulse of that single moment. War had come calling, knocking on the door of our simple lives, ready to drag us into a chaos we had barely begun to comprehend. I remember the faces around me, the way hope shattered like glass. Alaric's bravado crumbled, his laughter snuffed out, replaced by the dawning realization of what was to come. Isolde's spirit dimmed, the fire in her eyes flickering at the prospect of what lay ahead. Fear clutched at our throats, squeezing tight, as we understood that our days of innocence were numbered. Dreams became nightmares, and the earth beneath our feet felt like a rickety bridge teetering over an abyss. The tavern erupted in chaos, voices rising, panic seeping through the cracks. I remember, I murmured to myself, feeling the weight of the words hang in the air. I remembered the way Isolde's hands trembled as she clutched her apron, the way Alaric's bravado faded into a hollow laugh. The world spun on a dizzying axis, and I felt the fabric of our lives unraveling, thread by thread, as we confronted the nightmare of choosing life on the battlefield or remaining shackled to our fates. The storm outside raged, wind howling like a wounded beast, and I felt that same beast clawing at my insides. Moments stretched into eternity as we stood at the precipice of an unknown future, choices looming like specters in the fog. Fear mingled with a strange exhilaration. What awaited us in the chaos? Would we emerge unscathed, or would we become mere echoes of who we once were? I remember that night vividly, etched in my mind like a brand on my soul. The tavern was filled with shadows, whispers of courage and cowardice dancing in the flickering candlelight. The air was thick with the scent of ale and desperation, a toxic brew that intoxicated us, binding our fates. The war spectre loomed large, and with every heartbeat, we felt the undeniable truth: our lives were no longer our own. And as we stood there, teetering on the edge of a precipice, the storm outside roared louder, rivaling the tempest within us. The time for laughter and dreams had ended, the battlefield awaited, a blood-soaked tapestry of past and future, and we were all threads woven into its fabric, trembling against the inevitable. The echo of gunfire crackled through the air like the last gasp of a dying star, sharp and unforgiving. Each shot felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that in this moment, life was tenuous, and death lurked just beyond the shadows. The wind whispered secrets through the trees, chilling the marrow in their bones, as if the forest itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of steel, flesh, and fury. I remember the first day of training. It was a morning kissed by the sun's reluctant warmth, yet the chill in my gut mirrored the frost on the ground. The drill sergeant stood before us, a towering figure etched in shadows, his voice a thunderstorm of authority that crackled against our fragile spirits. "Welcome to hell," he bellowed, a sadistic grin stretching across his face as if the very idea brought him joy. "Your lives will be unrecognizable. You'll learn to kill or you'll die trying." Beside me, Kyle shifted uncomfortably. A small-town boy with dreams bigger than the horizon, he had entered with the fire of ambition in his eyes. Now, doubt flickered behind them like a candle in a windstorm. I could see the thoughts racing through his mind. Was this truly the path to honor, or simply a one-way ticket to despair? The truth is, we'd all signed up for glory, not this suffocating nightmare where the only certainty was pain. "Drop and give me 20, the sergeant barked, and suddenly we were on the ground, arms trembling under the weight of our bodies. "Faster! You're not here to play soldiers." Each push-up became a battle against the gravity of our fears. My heart thundered in my chest, a war drum summoning us to the front lines of our own inadequacies. I remember the sweat dripping into my eyes, blurring the sight of Kyle beside me, struggling. His breath came out in ragged gasps, the strain clear on his youthful face, and I felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't just training, it was a crucible, forging us into something unrecognizable. Later that night, the barracks were alive with the sounds of whispered voices, fear spilling into the silence like a broken dam. Beneath the heavy blanket of darkness, I caught Kyle staring blankly at the ceiling, lost in thought. "What if we're not ready?" he murmured, the tremor in his voice like a haunting melody. "What if they send us in too soon?" I wanted to reassure him, to promise him that we'd be trained, that we'd be transformed into what the military needed us to be. But I knew the truth, the training felt like a mosh pit of chaos, where the skills we were supposed to learn were drowned in the relentless tide of fear and fatigue. I remembered the week before, when we'd learned to handle weapons. The first time I pulled the trigger, the gun felt foreign in my hands, a beast that roared and spat out fire. But the recoil shook me, made my vision blur, and the reality of what I was doing hit harder than any bullet ever could. It was the realization that I was not just learning to fire a gun, I was learning to take life, to end a heartbeat. Days merged into one another, a relentless cycle of drills and fatigue. The sun rose and set, but it was irrelevant, time had become a cruel joke. I remember the cold mornings when we ran through the mud, the ground sucking at our boots, dragging us down, just as our doubts clawed at our minds. The cries of "hurry up" and "pick up the pace" became a soundtrack to our agony. We were told to be warriors, yet all I felt was the weight of inadequacy hanging like an anchor around my neck. And then there was Anna. Strong, fierce, a comet blazing across the dark expanse of our disillusionment. She was our only female squad member, a whirlwind of defiance and resilience. I admired her, but in the moments of unguarded vulnerability, I saw the cracks in her armor. "They treat us like we're nothing," she said one night, her voice barely above a whisper, yet each word thudded against my heart like a hammer. "We're training to be monsters, but they forget we're still human." She had a point. Training stripped us of our identities, molded us into something raw and primal, but it came with a cost. I could see it in the way her hands shook after a long day of drills, the way she fought against the tears that threatened to spill when we were alone. Then came the day of the live-fire exercise. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that clung to the earth like specters. The tension was palpable, a thick fog wrapping around us as we stood in formation, weapons at the ready. I glanced at Kyle, his eyes wide with fear, and I remembered the innocence that had brought us here. He had wanted to protect people, to be a hero. But as the first round rang out, it shattered the air, a sound more terrible than thunder. The chaos that followed was a symphony of screams and shouts, bullets whizzing past, the smell of gunpowder mixing with the metallic tang of fear. I remember running, my heart racing, adrenaline surging through my veins like fire. There was no time for thought, each moment was a blur, a cacophony of instinct taking over. But in the midst of it all, I saw Anna fall, her body crumpling to the ground as if the very earth had swallowed her. My heart stopped, and for a breath that seemed to stretch into eternity, all I could do was watch. She had trained harder than any of us, fought against every limit, yet here she was, reduced to a memory in the blink of an eye. "Get to cover!" The sergeant's voice rang out, but I was frozen, my world narrowing to the sight of Anna, the shadows dancing around her like phantoms. The horror clawed at my insides, a visceral reminder that training, no matter how brutal, could never truly prepare us for the hell of war. And as I stumbled away, the chaos fading behind me, I could feel the weight of every moment crashing down, the laughter, the pain, the dreams we had spun in the darkness, now unraveling before us into a tapestry of despair. I stumbled into a new reality, one where life and death danced on a razor's edge, and the skills we learned felt like echoes of a past that could haunt us forever. In that moment, I understood. Training was not just about learning to fight, it was about learning to live with the ghosts of those we would leave behind. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and fear as the sun sank, a dying ember behind a jagged horizon. Soldiers trudged forward, each footfall a heavy drumbeat of despair. They were shadows of themselves, men turned ghosts, haunted by the flickering images of home that hung in their minds like the last echoes of laughter before a storm. Their march was a funeral procession, each step taking them deeper into the maw of war, where hope lay buried beneath the mud. I remember the cold bite of the wind, sharp as a blade against my skin. I clutched my sword, a rusting relic that felt more like a weight than a weapon. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the memories that clawed at me as the mist rolled in. The faces of friends lost, whispers of promises made over hearty meals, flickered like fireflies in the darkening sky. And yet, here I was, marching shoulder to shoulder with men who were once strangers, now bound to me by the invisible threads of shared dread. Beside me was Thomas, his cheek sunken, eyes hollow as if he had already seen his own death. "I can't remember the last time I felt clean," he muttered, his voice cracking, each word a stone dropped into the abyss of our shared silence. "Do you think they'll remember us? When we're just bones beneath the earth?" A question that hung in the air like smoke, curling into unanswerable shapes. I wanted to tell him that they would remember us, honor us, but the truth was, I wasn't so sure. The weight of logistics bore down on me like a millstone. Supplies dwindled daily, the rations had become a cruel joke, just enough to keep our bellies rumbling without ever satisfying the hunger gnawing at our insides. I remembered the day we set out, the carts loaded with stale bread and salted meat, a paltry offering for the journey ahead. Each soldier had been a reluctant bearer of the burdens of war, dragging their fears and dreams behind them like heavy stones. A sharp cry pierced the air. We halted, hearts leaping into our throats. Ahead, a soldier had collapsed, his body crumpling like a puppet with severed strings. Panic rippled through the ranks. The medic, a weary-looking man with eyes that had witnessed too much, rushed forward. He's dehydrated, he shouted, the urgency igniting a fire within us. But our water supply was near empty, each drop a precious gem. Those lucky enough to have a skin filled with the life-giving liquid clutched them tight, unwilling to share. "We'll all die if we don't save him," I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. But desperation was an unforgiving mistress, a knife at the throat of reason. The medic knelt beside the fallen man, hands shaking as he poured the last precious drops onto cracked lips. "I remember," the man whispered, fading, a ghost caught between worlds. "I remember, sunlight on the fields, and then silence, a final sigh, a last breath." We moved on, the shadow of his death looming over us, a reminder of the fragility of our own existence. I glanced at Thomas, who looked as if he might crumble to dust. "We need to keep going, for him," I said, but my voice felt hollow, a weak attempt to stitch our frayed spirits together. The march continued, a relentless march through the twilight hours, and as night fell, the world transformed into a tapestry of shadows. The forest loomed like a monstrous beast, branches like clawed fingers reaching down to snatch us away. We stumbled through the darkness, haunted by the echoing crunch of leaves underfoot, a symphony of despair. "Tell me a story," Thomas begged, his voice barely a whisper, laced with fear. I racked my brain, searching for a light in the dark, clinging to those absurd moments of life that still flickered like dying stars. "Once, there was a night," I began, my words spilling out while the shadows danced around us. "He bathed once a year and still managed to win the heart of a beautiful maiden. True love isn't about cleanliness, but about the warmth you carry inside." I chuckled, the sound cracking my despair like fragile glass. "You see, it's all about perspective. Romance was earthy back then." He managed a laugh, a weak thing that barely made it past his lips, but it was enough to momentarily lift the suffocating weight of our reality. It reminded us of life, of laughter amidst the chaos, and if only for a heartbeat, we danced in the absurdity of our predicament. But even humor became a fleeting ghost as fatigue set in, robbing us of our strength. The horizon bore witness to our struggle, and the moon hung above us, a cold eye watching as we trudged through the night. I could feel time slipping away, the seconds morphing into hours, each tick of the clock echoing the heartbeat of a world at war. A rustle in the underbrush sent shivers racing down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, the tension crawling through my veins. The others had fallen silent, eyes wide, hearts pounding in unison. Shadows moved, and I could see Thomas lurch forward, fear wrapped around him like a cloak. We all felt it, the weight of something lurking just beyond our vision, a predator poised to strike. We pressed on, bodies weary and spirits frayed. Every labored breath echoed with the unspoken question, who would fall next? The spectre of death was a constant companion, a reminder that war was not just fought on the battlefield but was a relentless tide that swept away the living. The march became an endless loop of exhaustion and despair, each step a reminder of what lay ahead, a confrontation looming just beyond our grasp. I clung to the stories, to the absurdity of a knight and his unkempt love, a flickering candle against the encroaching darkness that threatened to swallow us whole. Still, we marched on, each heartbeat echoing in the silence of the night, each breath a desperate gasp for hope as the world around us darkened, the promise of battle whispering through the trees like a siren's call. With every step, we trudged deeper into the unknown, the horizon a thin line between life and death, the march to war a torment and a testament to our fragile humanity. The air buzzed with the palpable weight of anticipation, a tension so thick it clung to the skin like a second layer of armor, suffocating and intimate. A distant rumble of thunder echoed, though it wasn't the sky that churned ominously above. It was the men, standing shoulder to shoulder, hearts pounding, each beat a reminder of why they were there, why they would fight. A whispered prayer slipped through cracked lips, barely audible over the rustle of leather and iron. They were surrounded by ghosts, memories of battles never fought, and the promise of bloodshed that lay ahead. Jareth clenched his sword, the metal cool against his palm, yet weighed down by the burden of his inadequacy. The rusted blade had seen better days, days when it had tasted victory, when it had gleamed with promise. Now, it was a relic of desperation, a rusted tooth in a mouth long devoid of the sweetness of triumph. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of a puddle, mud-caked armor that barely offered protection, more a patchwork of memories than a safeguard against the inevitable. "I remember," he muttered, a mantra of acknowledgement, "I remember the day I wanted to be a hero." But that boy had died long ago, swallowed whole by the reality of war. Beside him, Elira adjusted her helmet, the metal scraping against the skin of her forehead, a mockery of her hope. She had dreamed of glory, of standing atop a battlefield, a radiant beacon of strength and defiance. Instead, she felt like a candle flickering in a storm. The armor she wore was ill-fitted, designed more for show than for battle, a costume for a play that had turned dark and bloody. She glanced at Jareth, their eyes meeting with a shared understanding, a silent agreement forged in the fires of fear. They were not warriors, they were survivors. "What if we're not enough?" she whispered, the question hanging heavy in the air, a spectre that refused to be banished. Around them, the foot soldiers shifted uneasily. Each one bore the scars of past encounters, the weight of history etched into their skin, the memories of comrades lost that haunted their every step. They had swords, yes, but swords were only as good as the hands that wielded them. Jareth had seen men with the finest weapons fall like leaves in autumn, and he wondered what it was that made a soldier brave. Was it the armor that shone? The sword that gleamed? Or was it the heart that thumped against the cage of ribs with a ferocity that could ignite a firestorm? And then there was Lorien, his laughter a brittle echo in the haunting silence of the moment. He was the jester-turned-soldier, the one who wielded humor as his shield against despair. You know, he cackled, they say the best armor is a good sense of humor. But in a pinch, I'd prefer actual armor. The laughter came out too sharp, too jagged, a desperate attempt to mask the tremors of fear staining his heart. He inspected his spear, splintered and worn, the wood rough against his fingertips, each groove telling a story of neglect. What good is this? He spat, anger bubbling beneath the surface. It's a toothpick against a dragon. But deep down, he feared that it was his own spirit that was the real toothpick, fragile and easily snapped. The distant clang of metal on metal rang out, a stark reminder of their purpose. The enemy was approaching, a dark tide creeping across the horizon, shadows blending seamlessly with the gathering storm. Jareth's heart raced, the drum of war beat louder in his ears. He tightened his grip on the sword, aware of its inadequacy, its failure to conquer what lay ahead. We need more, he said, the urgency sharp and biting. We need armor that can withstand the weight of our fears. Weapons that don't crumble under the pressure of our desperation. Elira's eyes glistened with unspent tears. What we need, she murmured, is courage. She pressed her palm against the crude shield strapped across her arm, a flimsy barrier against the chaos that awaited them. It was heavy, not with the weight of steel but with the burden of doubt. She thought of her brother, lost to battle yet still echoing in her heart, his laughter a haunting melody that chased the darkness away. He told me once that courage was like a flame, she recalled, her voice a fragile thread woven through the storm. Even the smallest spark can ignite a fire. Yet standing there, surrounded by men and women forged in the crucible of conflict, she felt as if they were all clinging to dying embers. What if the fire goes out, she whispered, the question like a ghost trailing her despair. Then we'll make another, Jareth replied, his voice a low rumble, rising above the storm. We are not just soldiers, we are the fire. The words hung in the air, daring fate to challenge them. They could feel the shadows creeping closer, the adrenaline surging, and in that moment, they knew they were on the precipice of something horrific yet inevitable. Lorien began to laugh again, the sound both comforting and chilling, the absurdity of it all wrapping around them like a shroud. We may not have the best weapons, but we have each other, he cried out, a bright glare against the darkness, even as his soul trembled beneath the weight of his own conviction. The laughter bounced off the walls of their fear, ringing with both madness and hope. For what is a soldier without laughter? A weapon without a wielder? A heart without a fire? The enemy surged forward, a wall of shadows swirling in the tempest, and as Jareth tightened his grip on the rusted sword, he understood the truth that threaded through their collective fears. They had come to this battlefield not just against the flesh and blood foe, but against the very essence of their insecurities, their doubts, their fears, their fractured hearts. The weapons they wielded were not merely steel and wood, they were hearts and souls, forged in the fire of camaraderie and suffering. And as the thunder cracked open the sky, illuminating the shadows with fleeting bursts of light, they stood resolute. They were flawed, they were imperfect, but they were alive. Each heartbeat echoed like a war drum, an anthem of defiance against the encroaching darkness. They had come as soldiers, but in that moment, they realized they were so much more. The first clash rang out, a cacophony of metal meeting flesh, but they moved as one, a tidal wave of resolve crashing against the tide of despair. Each step forward was a testament to their spirit, each swing of their weapons a declaration of their will to survive. The darkness loomed, but even in its embrace, they burned bright, a flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. In the storm of chaos, they fought not for glory but for each other, their laughter mingling with screams, their hope swelling in the face of fear. And as they pressed forward, they became a part of something greater, something unstoppable, a force fueled by the very essence of humanity itself, forever caught in the maelstrom of battle, forever echoing the haunting truth, the greatest weapons of all are the hearts that refuse to yield. The air hung thick, cloying with the stench of sweat, filth, and fear. It curled around the men like a living thing, an unseen predator lurking in the shadows of the camp. I remember the moment vividly, the grotesque tableau of bodies lined up, dirty and weary, faces streaked with grime, eyes hollow and haunted. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic prisoner desperate to escape the horror unfolding before me. It was just another day, if you could call it that, in this wretched war. But today, something was different. Today, death was not just a whisper on the battlefield, it was a palpable presence, creeping slowly, insidiously, into the very bones of our ranks. The sickening sound of coughing echoed ominously, a cruel symphony that filled the air with dread. I looked over at Thomas, his cheeks sunken, eyes glazed. The friend I once knew, a stout lad with laughter spilling from his lips like a song, was now a shadow, a ghost haunting the remnants of his own body. He had been a soldier, a brother, a beacon of hope, and now even his spirit seemed to be slipping away. I remember how he had laughed, a joyous noise that cut through the drudgery of days spent in muck and mire, but now he could barely lift his head. "Just a little cold," he'd said, voice cracking like brittle glass. But the cough, the raw, racking cough, told a different story, one of contagion and decay. I shifted my gaze to the line of men waiting for rations. They stood like statues, their faces etched with the weariness of desperation, the weight of disease pressing heavily upon them. Filth clung to their clothes like a curse. In a world where personal hygiene was a luxury, they were prisoners of their own bodies. I remember the stories whispered at night, tales of soldiers bathed in the blood of their enemies yet never cleansed of their own infections. Disease was the true enemy here, and it laughed in the face of valor. It was an invisible foe that couldn't be slain by sword or shield, a spectre that claimed more lives than the battlefield ever could. "Keep your distance," Sergeant Collins barked, his voice a thundercloud rumbling through the stillness. He was a man shaped by battles lost and found, a man who had seen too much. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the weariness in his eyes, as he surveyed the men before him, each one a ticking time bomb of disease. He was struggling with something more than the stench of unwashed skin. There was a fear gnawing at him, a truth he couldn't bring himself to voice. "You don't want to catch their sickness." That's when it hit me, the truth, the gnawing realization that we were not just fighting for survival but against ourselves, against the very essence of what it meant to be human. The disease was not just in our bodies but in our spirits, a creeping malaise that threatened to swallow us whole. I felt my stomach churn, the weight of it settling like lead. I could almost hear the clock ticking down the time we had left, each second a reminder of our mortality. I turned my attention back to Thomas, who was now staring blankly into the distance, lost in a world of his own. I could see the shadows dance in his eyes, the flicker of something deeper, a battle fought on an unseen front. "You remember the last time we bathed?" I asked, trying to ease the tension, grasping for a thread of normalcy. "It was, a week ago?" I chuckled, the sound brittle and hollow, a poor attempt at humor amidst the decay. "Or was it a month? I can't keep track anymore." He didn't respond, didn't even blink, as if the very act of remembering was too great a burden to bear. "How did it come to this?" I whispered, more to myself than to him, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. How had we arrived at a point where cleanliness was a distant memory, where the mere act of washing away the grime felt impossible? I could picture the cities we once knew, the busy streets filled with the chatter of life, now reduced to ghostly echoes of what had been. The world was spinning out of control, and we were mere puppets, tangled in the strings of fate. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the camp, and I could feel the weight of despair pressing down on my chest. "I remember," I began, each word a struggle. "I remember the stories my mother told me about the great battles, how the soldiers would return home, their armor gleaming, their faces clean. But here we are," my voice trailed off, the bitterness curling around my words like smoke, choking the life out of them. "Earthy," Thomas finally murmured, a ghost of a smile flickering across his lips, as if he could still grasp the absurdity of our situation. "You mean we're earthy?" He coughed again, the sound hollow in the stillness, yet somehow, in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of resilience. It was absurd, the idea of finding laughter in filth and disease, but that was what we had become, absurd beings clinging to the last vestiges of humanity in a world gone mad. In the distance, I could see the figures of the medics moving, their expressions grim, faces masked by fear and determination. They were the unsung heroes, the last line of defense against the tide of despair. They treated wounds like they were nothing more than cuts and bruises, not realizing that the greatest wounds were invisible, lurking in the shadows of our skin. I watched as they worked tirelessly, their hands stained with the remnants of death, their eyes reflecting the horrors they had witnessed. "Will we ever be clean again?" I asked softly, the question hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Each moment felt like a countdown, a slow march towards the inevitable. Thomas didn't answer, and in that silence, I felt the weight of our reality settle around me, a shroud of sickness, a blanket of despair. "Hey," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper, "remember the stars." It was a fragile thread of hope, a reminder of the vastness beyond our grim existence. I've always loved how they shine, even in the darkest of nights. I nodded, the memory flickering like a candle in the wind. Those nights spent lying on the cool grass, watching the cosmos, dreaming of a life free from suffering. But here we were, standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into the depths of uncertainty, engulfed by the darkness of our own making. As the last light faded, I felt the cold tendrils of fear wrap around me, knowing that tomorrow would come with its own share of horrors, its own battles. The war against our own bodies, against the diseases that haunted us, was just beginning. And in that suffocating silence, I realized that the true battleground lay not in the fields of conflict but within the fragile sanctuary of our souls, where hope flickered like a dying flame, desperately holding on. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and blood, a cocktail that haunts the battlefield long after the clamor fades. The distant sounds of clashing swords and the agonized screams of the fallen echo in my ears, vibrating against the walls of my mind. I remember the moment, how could I forget? I was pinned down between the jagged rocks of the hillside, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm, each beat urging me to flee, to run far from this hell. But then, that eerie silence fell, like a thick blanket settling over chaos, drawing the shadows closer. It was in that moment, that stillness, when the mercenaries appeared, specters clad in armor, their faces hidden beneath dark visors. I remember the first time I laid eyes on them. It was a chill spring morning, the sun fighting to break through heavy clouds. Their leader, a towering figure known as Hadran, moved with a confidence that made my knees weak. I was just a foot soldier, David, nothing remarkable about me. A farmer's son with calloused hands and a heart full of fear. Hadran's gaze cut through the haze of uncertainty, a cold flame that ignited a flicker of hope in my chest, even as it extinguished the warmth of camaraderie among the ranks. We were outnumbered, fighting for a cause that felt as distant as the stars, yet there he was, a mercenary, promising victory for coin and blood. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that seeps into your bones, whispering tales of betrayal and glory. I remember watching my brothers in arms, their faces a portrait of resolve mixed with despair. They looked to Hadran, seeking the spark that would light their fire, but what rose in their eyes was not hope, it was doubt. The mercenaries were here to fight, yes, but were they truly on our side? Or did their loyalty fade like the morning mist, vanishing when the sun pierced through? Jenna, a fierce warrior with a spirit brighter than the sun, had always believed in the brotherhood of soldiers. Her laugh used to fill the camp like music, a balm for our weary hearts. But as the mercenaries took their place beside us, I saw that laughter turn brittle. She became a flickering candle in an updraft, fighting against the winds of change. "They don't care about us," she whispered one night, her voice a fragile thread against the roaring fire. "We're just stepping stones for them, tools to be discarded." I wanted to comfort her, to cradle her fears in my hands, but I felt the same gnawing uncertainty. The mercenaries moved differently, shadows with purpose, marching to a rhythm that our souls could not follow. Each swing of their blades was fierce, yes, but it lacked the warmth of loyalty we once shared. It was a dance of efficiency, executed flawlessly, yet devoid of heart. I felt the weight of her words, a shackle around my heart, as I grappled with the reality that our fates were now intertwined with these hunters of fortune. The night before the battle, I couldn't sleep. The air crackled with anticipation, electric, a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. I could hear Hadron's voice, low and commanding, rallying the mercenaries. He spoke of glory and gold, of tales that would be sung in taverns for centuries. But what about our stories? The ones etched in blood and sweat, the ones that spoke of sacrifice, of love? As I lay there, staring into the abyss of the dark, I felt the shadows whispering secrets, promises of valor, but also hints of betrayal. When dawn broke, the battlefield was painted in grotesque colors, vibrant hues of red and brown against the pale blue sky. It was beautiful in its horror. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Jenna, the mercenaries flanking us like wolves circling their prey. I could feel her trembling, a song of fear trembling in her throat. "Whatever happens, David," she said, her voice raw, "stay close to me." I nodded, my heart heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of unshared fears. And then it began. The clash of metal on metal rang in my ears, a symphony of chaos that swallowed us whole. Hadran fought like a tempest, carving a path through the enemy ranks, each swing of his sword sending a ripple of awe through the foot soldiers. I should have felt inspired, but instead, I felt small, insignificant, a mere cog in a machine that had no regard for my existence. Jenna and I fought side by side, our souls tethered to one another, a lifeline in the maelstrom. But then I saw it, Hadran's cold eyes, devoid of compassion, as he struck down an opponent, a desperate soldier fighting for his family, for his home. In that moment, I felt the shattering of my spirit. The mercenaries were not heroes, they were mercenaries, and in their wake, they left a path of chaos that would haunt us forever. This was not about honor, it was about the price of blood. Each life taken was a coin dropped into their purses, and every cheer for victory rang hollow, echoing against the walls of my very being. In the frenzy of battle, I lost sight of Jenna. I searched for her amidst the whirl of bodies and screams, dread clawing at my insides. And there she was, struggling against a soldier, fighting for her life as well as mine. I ran, my heart pounding like war drums, but the mercenaries surged ahead, their movements precise, merciless. I saw Hadran strike down an enemy only to turn and leave Jenna to fend for herself. My breath hitched in my throat. "Jenna!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the cacophony. I tore through the chaos, desperation lending me strength. In that frantic dance of survival, I glimpsed the truth. Hadran and his kind were not merely soldiers, they were the harbingers of despair, shifting the tides of fate with their cold indifference. The battle raged on, and amidst the sharp staccato of pain and fury, I felt my spirit splintering. The mercenaries fought with a ferocity that overwhelmed us, and with each fallen comrade, the air grew heavier, suffocating us with its weight. I watched as Jenna fell, her fierce spirit extinguished in an instant, and with her, a part of me shattered. A scream erupted from my lips, raw and agonized, but no soldier came to my aid, only shadows, only echoes. In that moment, I understood. The mercenaries, with their hollow promises and fierce blades, had impacted more than just the battlefield, they had carved a chasm in the very fabric of our unity. I fell to my knees, the world around me a blur of chaos, and I felt the weight of despair settle upon me like a tombstone. There was no going back. The echoes of their laughter haunted the air, a cruel reminder that in the grand tapestry of war, we were but threads, worn, frayed, and easily discarded. And as Hadran's silhouette loomed against the sun, a god of destruction, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't forget Jenna. I wouldn't forget any of them. Each fallen soldier would become a whisper in the wind, a reminder of what it meant to fight, to stand against the tide of mercenaries who came and went, leaving nothing but sorrow in their wake. The storm was far from over, it had only just begun. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and iron. The ground vibrates with the pounding of hooves, a terrifying drum roll signaling the chaos to come. I stand there, heart racing, as the sun hangs low, casting long shadows over the field. It's a space where dreams of glory met the cold, cruel reality of death. I remember the first time I heard the roar, our battle cry echoing against the horizon, sharp and electrifying, like lightning tearing through a clouded sky. But now, as I grip my sword, the sound feels hollow, a prelude to despair. To my right is Marcus, a giant of a man with a heart too soft for the world we inhabit. Clad in battered armor that seems to weigh him down, he wipes the sweat from his brow, a nervous gesture that betrays the facade of bravado. He always wanted to be a hero, but I see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. It gnaws at him, like rats in a dark alley, hungry and relentless. "What if I can't protect them?" he mutters, a tremor in his voice. I want to tell him he'll be fine, but the truth is tethered to fear. On my other side stands Isolde, fierce and unyielding, a firebrand with fiery red hair that dances in the wind. She grips her spear with white-knuckled intensity, and I can see the anger swirling inside her, a storm ready to explode. "I won't let them take me," she growls, her voice steady, almost a promise. But I know her pain. Her brother fell in an earlier battle, a casualty of this merciless war. Revenge burns in her veins, and yet there's a flicker of uncertainty that threatens to consume her. She's a warrior, yes, but even the strongest armor can crack. We form up, shoulder to shoulder, a ragged line of humanity against the ominous swell of the enemy. There's a rhythm to it, the way we stand, the way we breathe, a collective heartbeat drumming out the tempo of our impending doom. The formation feels strange. We are not just soldiers but a tapestry of hopes and fears, woven together by threads of loyalty and desperation. I remember my mother's voice, whispering that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to face it. But God, how could she have known this? How could anyone know what it's like to stand on the brink of the abyss? The world around me seems to shrink as the enemy approaches, their battle flags snapping like jaws hungry for flesh. The sun glints off their armor, creating a grotesque mosaic of light and shadow, a shimmering facade that hides the bloodlust behind it. I've seen men crumble like dried leaves under the weight of that vision. The battlefield is a predator, ravenous and insatiable. I can hear the distant clash of metal, the cries of men who once stood like us, and the air thickens with the taste of iron, sharp and bitter. "Hold the line!" I shout, though my voice feels lost amidst the cacophony. The words tumble out, a mantra of desperate hope. But hope is a fragile thing, like the first breath of dawn struggling against the night, and I can feel it slipping through my fingers. The enemy surges forward, a tidal wave of malice, and time seems to warp. I remember flashes, Isolde's fierce gaze, Marcus's broad shoulders braced against the onslaught, my own heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. The clash is instantaneous, a violent orchestra of screams, metal, and agony, each note more discordant than the last. The ground becomes slick, and I find myself knee-deep in mud and blood, the very earth a complicit partner in this dance of death. I strike out, the blade of my sword singing through the air, cleaving flesh and bone with a sickening ease. Each swing is a prayer, a plea, let me survive. Let me protect them. And yet, the ghosts of those I've lost whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me that survival comes at a price. I see Marcus stumble as an enemy's axe finds its mark. I hear the sickening crunch of his armor giving way. No! I scream, and the sound is a raw, unfiltered emotion, an echo of my own vulnerability. I rush to him, but the tide pulls me back, an unforgiving current in this sea of chaos. Isolde is a whirlwind, darting between soldiers, her spear a dart of vengeance. She embodies the very essence of a warrior, yet I can see the mask slipping. A moment of hesitation, a flicker of doubt, and it's all it takes. One soldier catches her off guard, a dagger plunging deep into her side. "Isolde!" I cry, the name tearing from my throat. Her fierce spirit flickers, eyes wide with disbelief, as the color drains from her face. I reach for her, but the world has turned into a maelstrom, a vortex where time and space lose meaning. The battlefield is alive with chaos, a living nightmare where humanity's darkest desires are laid bare. It's not just a fight for survival, it's a grotesque theater where every soul grapples with the ghosts of their past, each clash of steel a reminder of their own mortality. We are nothing, I think, as I fight to keep my footing, the ground shifting beneath me like quicksand. The weight of it all is suffocating, and for a moment, I'm engulfed in the horror of what we've become, warriors turned monsters, fighting not for honor, but for mere breath. The bright sun dips lower, the shadows growing long and ominous, as if the cosmos itself mourns our descent into madness. I know the end is near, the specter of defeat looming heavy above us, and yet, a stubborn spark flickers in my chest. "Fight," it whispers, a ghostly echo in the storm of chaos. I will not let their sacrifices be in vain. I turn back to the fray, my sword raised, heart pounding with the rhythm of a desperate hope. In this unyielding storm, I find myself teetering on the edge, both terrified and exhilarated. Each moment is suspended in time, a haunting ballet of life and death, where the only inevitability is that the battle rages on. And just as the tide seems to rise, enveloping us in darkness, I remember that the fight is not just for survival, but for every heartbeat, every fleeting moment of love and laughter that this war threatens to extinguish. As the clash continues, shadows lengthen, and the cries of the fallen echo into the void, the very air filled with a bone-chilling urgency. The conditions of this battle are brutal, raw, and unforgiving, yet amidst the chaos, there lies a deeper truth, a collective struggle of souls fighting against the abyss. The field becomes a canvas painted with hope and despair, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the human spirit remains unbroken, flickering like a candle amidst the storm, refusing to surrender. The sudden blast echoed like a thunderclap, shattering the thin veil of silence that hovered like a ghost over the battlefield. The ground trembled beneath Jake's feet, a brutal reminder that the earth itself could consume him at any moment. He crouched low, breath hitching in his throat as he pressed his back against the cold, unforgiving wall of crumbling stone. Dust motes danced in the air, illuminated by the flickering light of distant explosions, a macabre ballet of chaos. His heart raced, each thump a desperate plea to keep breathing, to keep fighting. "Stay down, stay down!" Marco hissed, his eyes wide and frantic, a wounded animal caught in a snare. The young soldier's fingers trembled as he clutched a rifle that felt heavier than the weight of the world. Marco was just a kid, he was supposed to be back home, laughing over greasy burgers in a corner diner, not crouched in this hell. Jake could see the fear written on his face, the shadows of nightmares already haunting him, even in the thick of this reality. I can't do this anymore," Marco gasped, voice shaking like a frayed wire. "I don't want to die here." Those words struck Jake with a visceral force, each syllable piercing through his own layers of numbness. He remembered the last sunny day back in their hometown, where laughter had filled the air, the promise of a future bright enough to drown out the darkness. "You're not going to die, Marco," he said, the words tasting like ash. "We just need to hold on a little longer." But what did he know? The truth loomed heavy as a storm cloud. They were all just bodies on a chessboard, pieces waiting to be knocked aside. Jake could almost hear the ticking of time, every second stretching into an eternity of dread. He thought of the men who had fallen beside him, the blood seeping into the earth, staining the soil while the wind whispered their names like a haunting tune. He thought of the ghosts that haunted him, the faces of friends lost, echoing in the silence. With a sudden flash, a blast lit up the night sky, and for a brief moment, the world was illuminated. Jake saw them, his fallen brothers, their eyes glassy, mouths open in silent screams. "Don't look," he shouted, shaking Marco's shoulder, but it was too late. The kid's eyes widened in horror, trapped in a vision of death and despair. "I remember," Marco murmured, lost in a dark reverie. "I remember my mom's soup, how it bubbled when she'd stir it. And I remember," his voice trailed off, the memories crashing like waves against the shore of his sanity, each one more painful than the last. A shrapnel of pain tore through Jake's chest, an unbearable knot forming in his throat as he watched Marco drift further away from reality, untethered. "Stay with me, Marco," he yelled, but the kid was gone, adrift in the murky waters of his mind. Jake felt sweat trickle down his back, mixing with dirt and fear, a grotesque reminder that they were still alive, but at what cost? The echoes of gunfire surrounded them, the cacophony becoming a twisted soundtrack to their existence. Every shot was a metronome of despair, marking the tempo of the madness that enveloped them. It was an infernal symphony, one that played on repeat in Jake's mind, his own heart thumping in sync as if it too were part of the orchestra. "Why are we here?" Marco's voice cracked, the innocence bleeding from his words. "Why are we fighting?" Jake had no answer, and that truth gnawed at him, a ravenous beast with sharp claws. He looked into Marco's eyes, searching for some flicker of hope, a spark that could reignite their will to survive. But all he found was a reflection of his own fear, a mirror of despair that threatened to swallow them both whole. "I remember the stars," Jake whispered, his voice barely above a breath. How they lit up the night sky, how they made everything seem far away. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the peaceful night spent lying on the grass, dreaming of the future. We'll see them again, Marco. I promise. But what was a promise worth in the face of death? The thought twisted in his gut, an anchor dragging him down into the depths of hopelessness. He could almost taste the bitterness of betrayal, the betrayal of their youth, of their dreams now turned to ash. Then came the silence, a chilling, suffocating void that draped over the battlefield like a dense fog. It pressed against Jake's lungs, threatening to suffocate him as he peered over the rubble. What lay ahead felt like an abyss, an insatiable maw ready to consume them both. He saw shadows moving, but they felt like specters, little more than figments of their frayed sanity. Jake, Marco's voice broke through, fragile and trembling. What if we don't make it out? Don't say that. Jake snapped, the words sharp and desperate. We will. We have to. Each word was a lifeline thrown into the churning sea of doubts, but deep down, Jake felt the tide of despair rising, threatening to drag him under. The distant rumble of artillery resumed, shaking the ground and their resolve. In that moment, amid the chaos, Jake felt the weight of 1,000 souls pressing down on him, the collective sorrow of lost dreams and broken promises. All those faces, all those stories, etched into his memory, became a haunting chorus of despair. I can't take it anymore. Marco shouted suddenly, his voice cracking like glass, splintering under the pressure. I can't see them anymore. They're everywhere, Jake. The ghosts, they won't leave me alone. Jake's heart twisted with anguish. You're not alone, Marco, he pleaded, but the kid was slipping further into the darkness, grasping at shadows while the world around them spiraled into chaos. He was losing him, and the thought was a dagger to his soul. With each crack of gunfire, with each breath filled with dust and despair, the night swallowed them whole, leaving behind only the echoes of their fears. The battlefield stole their innocence, leaving them with scars that would never heal, ghosts that would haunt them long after the smoke cleared. All around them, the shadows shifted, and time twisted like a cruel joke, wrapping its tendrils around their minds. There was no escape, only the relentless march of trauma, a symphony of fear that would reverberate in their hearts forever. Each heartbeat was a reminder that life was fragile, a flickering candle in the wind, and they were just two souls adrift in an unforgiving storm. As the darkness closed in, the haunting realization gripped Jake's very core. They were not just fighting for survival, they were grappling with the demons that lurked in the depths of their own minds, a battle far more treacherous than the one on the field. And somewhere, in the twisted echoes of war, the fight for their sanity had only just begun. The air hangs thick with the metallic scent of blood, a visceral reminder that life and death tango in this forsaken clearing. I stand amidst the remnants of a battle that raged just moments ago. The ground beneath my feet is a grotesque tapestry of mud, flesh, and shattered dreams. I see a man, a soldier, yes, but more so a father, a brother. His chest heaves, shallow and desperate, each gasp a plea for life, yet he lies encumbered by the weight of his own shattered body. I remember the way he laughed, a booming sound that once echoed through the camaraderie of our camp, now silenced by the chaos and agony of combat. Help me, he croaks, his voice barely a whisper, like a moth's wings brushing against the walls of a suffocating night. I reach for him, but my hands tremble, not from fear, but from the sheer terror that he may not make it. Around us, shadows flicker. They flit between the jagged remains of swords and shields, a haunting dance of specters that once were men. I spot Kiernan, his face pale and drawn, cradling a vacant stare as if he's already stepped into the beyond. I remember how we shared dreams under starry skies, discussing futures that now lay crumpled like discarded parchment. The weight of his absence settles on my heart like a stone, the camaraderie we forged now feels like a cruel joke. Hey, Kiernan! I call out, but my voice does not reach him. He's lost, trapped in the labyrinth of his own mind, perhaps drifting through memories too sweet to bear. I remember the time he tried to woo a tavern maid with a song, his off-key notes swirling like drunken bees around her, making her laugh. Those moments are ghosts now, slipping through my fingers like sand. I kneel beside the gasping soldier, the one whose name I've forgotten in the haze of horror, and apply pressure to the ragged wound in his side, warm blood seeping through my fingers. He looks at me, eyes wide, and I see in them a flicker of recognition. "Tell my children," he mutters, a sentence cut short by the labor of his breaths. His children. I remember my own, their laughter ringing like a bell in my heart, a sound that feels distant now, like a melody lost to time. I cannot bear to think of what will become of them, the empty spaces left behind, the echoes of love now hollow. As cries of anguish fill the air, the reality of defeat settles like a dark mist. I look up, and there they stand, our former brothers in arms, now enemies. They watch us with eyes that speak of victory, but I see something behind their triumph, the same fear, the same dread of what comes next. In battle, we are defined by our swords, but in aftermath, we are unmade by our humanity. I stand, the soldier's blood warming my hands, and take a step toward Kiernan. But the ground shifts beneath me, a tremor of despair. I remember the last time I felt solid ground underfoot, the moment before the storm, the recklessness of hope that we could win. Time was a cruel trickster then, and it laughs now, as it measures our losses. The sky darkens, shadows folding into one another like sorrowful secrets. I hear the groans of the wounded, mingling with the whispers of the dying. Each sound is a note in a symphony of devastation, and I am lost in the composition. I remember the way we used to joke about the brutality of life, how absurd it was that we danced with death and still believed in love. But now, I laugh bitterly at the irony. Why are we still here? Kinnan's voice breaks through the fog, a fragile thing that trembles on the edge of despair. Why do we linger? His eyes search mine, a mirror reflecting the chaos inside. The truth is, I don't know. I can't even find the words to reassure him. How do you explain that our lives have become a canvas splattered with pain, that hope has fled into the corners of the earth, leaving us to navigate the shadows? I reach for his shoulder, my fingers brushing against the remnants of our past. We're alive, I say, but the words sound hollow, empty as the void before dawn. His gaze is piercing, searching for a flame of hope in my own apprehension. But all I see is a graveyard of dreams, and the weight of our losses presses down on me like 1,000 stones. The soldier beside me gasps, his breaths growing weaker, shallower. Tell them I loved them, he whispers, each word a ghostly wisp escaping his lips. His hand falls limply to the ground, a final surrender to the abyss. I feel my heart shatter, a din of relentless sorrow echoing through my soul. Kinnan's sobs ripple through the stillness, a raw, unfiltered expression of grief that cuts through the desolation like a knife. I want to comfort him, to pull him back from the brink of despair, but I am adrift in my own storm. It isn't fair, I murmur, the words falling like lead. None of this is fair. The battlefield sprawls before me, a canvas of despair where the living and the dead share secrets in their silence. I remember the stars, how they twinkled in mockery of our struggles. They are distant now, as if they, too, have turned their backs on us. The clock ticks away the moments of our lives, each second a reminder of the price we pay for this existence. From the corners of my mind, I see shadows rising like phantoms, faces of those who have fallen, each one a reminder of what we've lost. I remember their laughter, their dreams, the moments that defined them, now transformed into echoes swirling in the darkness. Can we still dream? Kinnan asks, his voice small, a child's question wrapped in the fabric of a broken man. I want to tell him yes, to bring back the light, but the truth clings to my throat like a noose. We must, I whisper, but the weight of my own words feels like a betrayal. What is a dream when the world is drenched in sorrow? And as the sun dips below the horizon, and the darkness creeps in, I realize we stand at the edge of a silent precipice, teetering between hope and despair, between life and the haunting silence of what remains after battle. The echoes of the fallen linger, a haunting refrain that fills the night with promises unfulfilled and hearts unbound. We are left with the aftermath, the raw, aching void of loss, yet, even in this darkness, a flicker of something stirs. A haunting melody in the silence, a memory of laughter, a promise of tomorrow. The air hung thick, as if the sky itself held its breath, a shroud of anticipation draping over the beleaguered camp. A single flickering flame danced in the distance, its light casting grotesque shadows on haggard faces, faces that were once full of laughter, now hollowed by desperation. The wind whispered secrets of decay, weaving through rags and tattered tents, carrying the metallic scent of blood mingled with something far more wretched, hunger. I remember the moment when the last of the livestock was slaughtered. The blade gleamed, and for just a heartbeat, I thought I saw a glimmer of relief in Thomas's eyes, my brother, my anchor in this tempest of despair. But that flicker died quickly, extinguished by the weight of realization that the blood pooling upon the earth was not merely food, it was hope, oozing away like the lifeblood of the very land we fought to reclaim. Each slice of meat, each guttural scream from the beast felt like a betrayal, a haunting reminder that survival came at a price. In the days that followed, rations dwindled faster than the sun could rise and set. We rationed the last scraps of the slaughter, chewing on sinewy remnants, our teeth gnashing against the bitterness of existence. One more day, I would whisper to myself, clinging to the fragile thread of promise that tomorrow might bring relief. But tomorrow rolled in like a tide of despair, waves crashing over us, dragging down any feeble glimmers of hope, leaving behind only sand and salt. It was in the dead of night, when the camp lay still, that I found Clara huddled over a makeshift fire, her hands trembling as she tore at the last remnants of bread, now as dry and brittle as autumn leaves. I could see the shadows of her bones protruding, every rib a cruel reminder of what we were losing. "I wish we could eat the stars," she whispered, her voice a ghost in the night, cracked and yearning. "If only they'd sprinkle down like sugar, we'd be rich." There was a humor in her words, a desperate attempt to find light in the suffocating darkness, but it hung heavy, like a weight dragging her down into a pit of despair. "Or at least eat the moon," I chuckled half-heartedly, though the laughter lodged in my throat, a bitter stone. I wanted to be the jester, to chase away the shadows lurking just behind her smile. But the absurdity of it all clawed at me, gnawed at the edges of my sanity. Could we really find solace in the laughter of dreams? Or were we just ghosts roaming a battlefield of our own making? Every hour felt eternal, a clock forever stuck in the dread of waiting. I remember the gnawing in my belly, a hollow echo that resonated with the cries of the dying. It haunted our dreams, screams of comrades long lost, the chilling sound of bones scraping against the earth, a reminder that starvation was a slow execution, a lingering death sentence. Each night, we wrestled with the spectre of death, feeling its icy grip tighten around our throats, squeezing the very breath from our lungs. And then came the day the rain fell, not as a savior, but a taunt. The sky opened up, droplets falling like 1,000 tiny daggers, each one piercing our already frayed hopes. The muck beneath our feet transformed into a mire, a sucking grave that threatened to swallow us whole. If only it would rain food, I muttered bitterly, wiping mud from my brow, looking at Clara with eyes that begged for understanding. But she only shook her head, tears mingling with the rain, an unholy baptism of sorrow. In that moment, I saw the flicker of something behind her eyes, a burning ember of defiance. "We won't give in," she shouted into the storm, the wind tearing at her words as if to silence her. "We're not ghosts yet." Her voice soared, a battle cry against the encroaching darkness. But I could see it, the hollow echo that lingered beneath the surface of her bravado. We were all teetering on the brink, the precipice of survival blurring into the abyss of despair. And then there was Thomas, caught in the crossfire between fierce loyalty and desperate hunger. He had always been the protector, the one who kept the shadows at bay, but now, I could see the cracks in his resolve. What if we took a risk?" he whispered one night, his voice barely a breath above the rustling leaves. "What if we went to the city, just for one night? There might be food, there has to be." A tremor ran through me, a wave of panic crashing against the flickering hopes we clung to. The city was a fortress now, thick with its own ghosts, shadows that danced in alleyways, entwined with madness and desperation. "And what if we don't come back?" I challenged, my words heavy with the weight of fear. We had already lost so much, could we afford to gamble with our lives in a place where despair reigned supreme? But desperation knotted within Thomas. "If we do nothing, then we're already dead," he cried, eyes blazing with a fevered intensity that made me think of wild animals, cornered and ready to fight. It was as if he had summoned the last remnants of our courage, even if it felt like grasping at straws in a storm. Time twisted and turned, and with it, the shadows grew longer. I felt my heart race, pulse pounding in my ears as the decision loomed before us: stay in the mire of starvation, or venture forth into the unknown, risking everything for a sliver of sustenance. Amid the swirling chaos of hunger and despair, I could almost taste the desperation that thickened the air, a bitter salve to our aching souls. It clung to us like a shroud, whispering promises of gnawed bones and empty bellies, while the haunting laughter of our dreams echoed in the distance, fading, always fading. The night wore on, the stars mocking us with their brilliance, as if they had feasted on the very hopes we sacrificed at the altar of survival. And yet, beneath the weight of despair, there flickered a flame, a reckless, beautiful spark that dared us to fight. Every heartbeat echoed with the choice we were about to make, the sound of desperation turning into resolution. In that moment of impending confrontation, I felt alive, trembling with the fear of what lay ahead, and the intoxicating possibility of survival that lingered just beyond the darkened horizon. The air was heavy with the scent of smoke and despair, a visceral reminder of the chaos encircling their little town. In the dim light of the kitchen, Clara stood, hands trembling, a pot of soup bubbling over the fire. The sound echoed against the walls, an intrusion, a siren call to the memories she tried to suppress. She turned away, eyes darting to the window, where shadows danced like phantoms. Every windowpane vibrated with the echoes of distant gunfire, each boom a heartbeat, threatening to tear apart what little remained of her world. I remember, the words fell from her lips like a prayer. I remember when he left. The memory was a ghost that haunted her still. The day James had kissed her cheek, the stubble on his chin scratching her skin as he held her tightly. The promise of return lingered in his eyes, shimmering like a mirage. Her heart had swelled with pride, but now it felt like a stone, heavy and cold. She glanced at the door, half expecting him to burst through, laughing, dirty from the road, his arms stretched wide. But the door remained shut, the silence in her home a stark contrast to the world outside. Across town, in a house suffocated by war, Mary was pressing her palms against the wall, her fingers tracing the cracks like a map of her fractured heart. "They say the war makes men out of boys," she whispered to the peeling paint, her voice a mere thread of sound lost in the cacophony of life outside. "But what does it make of us?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, heavy with the weight of all the women who had watched their loved ones march away, only to return as shadows of who they once were. Her son, Samuel, was just a boy who once danced in the backyard, twirling under the sunlight that now seemed so far away. He was a soldier now, lost in the fray, his laughter a distant memory. Every day, Mary woke to the stark reality of an empty seat at the table, a place where dreams once flourished. The letters he sent were filled with bravery, with words that painted a picture of valor. Yet, she could sense the cracks, the trembling hands behind the bravado. Each stroke of his pen was a plea, a desperate attempt to shield her from the terror that played out in the trenches. "I remember," she murmured, "I remember when his laughter rang through these walls." The echo of his joy was drowned out by the relentless ticking of the clock, each tick a reminder of time slipping through her fingers, of moments that would never be reclaimed. The world outside continued to burn, but in her heart, the flames had long since extinguished. And then there was Margaret, waiting at the gates of the soldiers' camp, clutching a faded photograph of her husband, Thomas, who had promised her the stars. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that twisted like the thoughts in her mind. Every day felt like eternity, and every hour stretched with the heavy weight of worry. Will he come back? The question was a mantra, whispered between sobs, between breaths that felt jagged and sharp. She felt the eyes of other women upon her, their silent solidarity as palpable as the air thick with uncertainty. The gates creaked, and her heart thundered. Each soldier that passed was a reflection of her fears, carrying the weight of stories untold. She searched each face, yearning to catch a glimpse of the man who had promised her forever, a life filled with laughter and love, now reduced to this tormenting limbo. The world churned around her, but all she could do was stand, rooted in the dust and despair, hoping that love could transcend the horrors of war. "I remember," she whispered again, this time louder, as if summoning the stars. "I remember how he held me, how he made me believe that we could conquer the world." But those dreams felt like ashes now, scattered, bitter, swallowed by the winds of fate. As the days blended into one another, Clara, Mary, and Margaret found themselves on the same path, a shared grief drawing them together like moths to a flame. In the quiet corners of the market, they exchanged knowing glances, their hearts heavy with the same unspoken sorrows, the same fragmented fears. They silently bore witness to each other's pain, each shared moment a lifeline in the sea of uncertainty. One afternoon, as the sky wept soft rain onto the cobblestones, they gathered in Clara's kitchen, the pot of soup forgotten on the stove. "What if they don't come back?" Mary's voice trembled as she spoke, the question a raw wound that echoed in the silence that followed. Each woman felt the weight of the words, the gravity of the truth that hung in the air like a dark cloud. Clara's breath hitched, her chest tight with the reality of their situation. She wanted to reach out, to comfort, but the words felt hollow, pale shadows of hope. "We wait," she finally said, the word a fragile promise. "We wait and we love them from here, even if they can't feel it." "But what if love isn't enough?" Margaret's voice cracked, and for a moment, vulnerability stripped them bare. In that raw moment of shared anguish, they saw the flicker of humanity beneath the armor of war. Each one of them clung to their dreams, their memories, yet they were bound together by fear, the fear of loss that lingered like a ghost, haunting every corner of their lives. The room fell into silence, the only sound the soft patter of rain against the roof, a rhythm that mirrored their heartbeats, fragile, unsteady, yet undeniably alive. In that moment, the war felt distant, its shadows looming but not suffocating. They were women, mothers, wives, each a warrior in her own right, battling the demons of despair and grief one day at a time. Yet, as the light dimmed and night settled in, they knew the war was far from over. The clock ticked on, relentless and indifferent, each second dragging them deeper into the unknown. And so, they held on to hope and each other. In a world that felt like it was crumbling, they became the pillars, the fierce, unyielding heartbeats against the chaos that lay beyond their walls. The war was not fought solely on the front lines, it raged within their homes, their hearts, a battle of resilience, love, and the suffocating fear of what the dawn might bring. Rain drummed against the earth, a relentless tattoo, each drop a reminder of promises broken. In the midst of the downpour, a cluster of soldiers huddled beneath a fraying canvas, their eyes glazed with exhaustion and desperation. I remember the way the mud clung to their boots, a weight of earth pulling them deeper into the mire of their reality, each man a foot soldier, each a heartbeat silenced by the indifferent world around them. Thomas, his face a mask of fatigue, whispered, "What's it all for, eh? A handful of copper for a year of hell." I remember the hollow laughter that followed, bitter and empty, echoing through the damp air. They were men of flesh and blood, but in that moment, they were shadows trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The world beyond their canvas was chaos, and the promise of glory felt like a cruel jape. For them, glory was a mirage, shimmering just out of reach, while they focused on their daily grind, their daily bread. The squalor of camp life clung to them like a second skin. I can still smell the sweat mingled with the stench of unwashed bodies, the acrid scent of fear and desperation. Every wretched meal they consumed was a reminder of their lowly station, thick gruel, grey bread, and occasionally, if the gods favored them, a scrap of meat. They fought not for honor but for a meager wage that barely kept starvation at bay. What could a mere 10 pence buy? A fleeting moment of warmth? A few bites of food? Nothing but the ghost of a promise. Then there was Eli, the ever-hopeful dreamer, his eyes glimmering with the fading light of ambition. "I'll save enough to buy a farm," he would say, a crooked grin stretching across his dirt-streaked face. "A place with real walls, not these damn tents." But dreams are cruel in their futility. I remember the way his gaze drifted, lost in the fog of wishful thinking, while the reality of their lives clawed at him like the chilling wind that swept through their encampment. He was a man with a heart too big for a world that rewarded only the cold and calculating. And there stood Jareth, a soldier forged in steel and sadness. His brow was furrowed with unspoken burdens, the weight of his family's future resting on his shoulders. He had mouths to feed, children too young to understand the concept of sacrifice, yet too old to escape the pain of poverty. "I'm just trying to hold it all together," he said, though his voice trembled, betraying the unraveling threads of his resolve. I remember the flicker of candlelight as they gathered each night, sharing bits of dreams, hopes ignited by the mere thought of better days ahead. But as the fire crackled and sparked, so did their laughter, a fleeting warmth against the biting cold of reality. In those moments, they were more than soldiers, they were fathers, brothers, friends. But as the shadows lengthened, the laughter waned, replaced by silence, an oppressive blanket of despair settling over them like the rain outside. "Did you hear?" Thomas whispered one night, his voice low, like a secret shared among ghosts. "They say the Lord's feast while we starve." His words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Those lords, cloistered in their grand halls, feasting on roasted meats and fine wines, while these men, these brave, broken men, fought for scraps. It was a line drawn in the sand, stark and cruel. The tension in the air crackled, heavy with unfulfilled rage. I remember Eli's face, twisted between defiance and despair. "We're more than just pawns in their game," he said, fists clenched, knuckles white against the fading light. "We deserve," but before he could finish, the sound of hooves thundered in the distance, a grim reminder that the storm wasn't just external. The officers approached, cloaked in the authority of their station, their eyes cold as they surveyed the pitiful assembly before them. I could see the disdain in their faces, the way they regarded the soldiers as mere tools, expendable and easily replaced. "Break camp," one barked, his voice a whip crack in the night. "You're not worth a copper on the battlefield." Those words, those venomous words, cut deeper than any sword. The soldiers flinched as if struck, the air thick with the taste of humiliation, a bitter pill swallowed in silence. In that instant, I could feel Jareth's heart shatter, the fragments of his dream scattering like ashes in the wind. "It's not right," he said, a whisper, but it echoed through the group, a small spark against the darkness. "We fight for them, for their wealth, and what do we get in return?" I remember the silence that followed, a chasm of despair, each man wrestling with his own inner turmoil. Their worth reduced to the value of coin, their humanity eclipsed by the brutal reality of their situation. It was a reckoning, each soldier forced to confront the harsh truth of his existence. They were nothing more than pieces on a chessboard, moved by hands that didn't care if they fell. And as the rain continued to pour, so did the weight of their shared grief, a tapestry woven from threads of despair and defiance. I felt it pulse through the air, a heartbeat of collective suffering that bound them together, turning despair into something more, a fierce resolve simmering beneath their skin. In the darkness, I saw the flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or rebellion, igniting behind their weary eyes. They could rise, they would rise. The wages they earned were meager, almost laughable, but their spirits, those were priceless. In the face of oppression, they would not be silent. The night stretched on, thick with anticipation, filled with unspoken plans and dreams of a future forged in the fire of their shared struggle. And in their hearts, a storm brewed, one that would tear through the silence and shatter the chains of their bondage. I remember the way the shadows danced, the way the rain fell like 1,000 tears, their tears, mingling with the earth below, and I felt the pulse of their resolve beat like a war drum, echoing into the darkness, each thump a promise of what was to come. The air crackled with the metallic scent of blood and fear, swirling like a storm above the battlefield. I remember the way the sun hung low that day, casting long shadows that slithered across the mud, as if the earth itself were alive, hungry for the souls of the fallen. The clash of steel rang out, a chilling symphony of chaos, desperate cries blending with the hollow thud of bodies hitting the ground. I was just a foot soldier, a nameless cog in a grand machine, yet the weight of my insignificance crushed me with each swing of my sword. Gareth stood beside me, his breath ragged, a wild look in his eyes. He was my friend, my brother in arms, but even then I could see the cracks forming in his resolve. "What are we doing here?" he shouted over the din, his voice laced with desperation. "Do they even know our names? Do they care?" Each word pierced through the fog of war, raw and blistering, igniting a fire in my chest. The nobles, safe in their gilded castles, feasted and laughed, their decisions echoing like thunder across the battlefield. They played at war like children with toys, while we were the ones left to bleed and die for their whims. I clenched my fists around the hilt of my sword, knuckles white with rage. I remember how they'd ordered us to hold this line, to fight for honor, for the flag that flew high above the castle, a flag that meant nothing to men like us. It was a cruel joke, a game of chess where we were the pawns, sacrificed without a second thought. The ground trembled beneath us, a reminder of what was at stake. I glanced at the horizon, where the setting sun spilled blood-red hues across the sky, and I felt the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. "We're not just numbers, Gareth," I managed to shout back, though my voice felt small, feeble against the roar of conflict. "We're human. We have lives, families, dreams." But deep down, I questioned whether those dreams mattered in a world ruled by the whims of the aristocracy. In the thick of it, I caught a glimpse of Lord Cedric, the man whose decisions had led us to this slaughter. He stood on a hill, gleaming armor catching the last rays of sunlight, a vision of nobility unmarred by the realities of war. His laughter danced on the wind, a mocking note that twisted in my gut. "Look at them," he might have said, "the brave foot soldiers." I could almost hear his voice, laced with sarcasm, as if our sacrifices were merely tales to entertain the court. I remember the day I learned of the battle's true purpose. We were camped by the river, the moon a cold witness to our despair. The whispers among the men had grown louder, heavy with dread. "They're fighting over land," one soldier rasped, "but they'll never set foot on it." I remember the chill creeping into my bones as I realized that while we were the ones dying, they would toast to our courage as if it were a fine wine. Suddenly, the air shifted, a tension that pricked at my skin. The enemy charged, a wave of bodies, a tide of fury. My heart raced, each beat a drum heralding death. I stumbled forward, thrusting my sword into the mass before me, but each victory felt hollow. I caught Gareth's eye, a flicker of fear mirrored in his gaze. And in that moment, I understood the cost of loyalty. Our lives counted for nothing but a score on a noble's ledger. The cries of soldiers twisted into a cacophony, their pain becoming mine, a shared anguish that seeped into my soul. I remembered the faces of those I loved. My mother's hands, worn and calloused, the way she'd smile even when times were dark. I remembered the warmth of home and the laughter of children playing, memories now tainted by the horror surrounding me. "Fight for your families!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the chaos. I could see Gareth faltering, his sword growing heavy, his spirit dimming like the dying sun. "Gareth!" I reached for him, but it was as if an invisible wall had formed, separating us by the weight of our burdens. He looked at me, eyes pleading, heartache woven into the lines of his face. Time slowed, stretching out like the shadows around us. I could see the faint glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes, yet it was snuffed out as a spear pierced his side, a brutal reminder of our mortality. He fell, crashing into the mud, and my heart shattered with the force of 1,000 thunderclaps. The world around me blurred, the battle fading into a distant roar as I knelt beside him, cradling his body, his breath growing fainter with each passing moment. "Why?" he gasped, and I felt the chill of despair wrap itself around my heart, squeezing tighter. "Why do we fight? For them?" I couldn't answer, my voice caught in the throat of injustice. The weight of the nobles' decisions pressed down on us, suffocating dreams and erasing lives. All we were left with were the ghosts of our ambitions, haunting the fields where we spilled our blood. In those last moments, as the world twisted and blurred, I saw the faces of the nobility flash before me, each one a spectre, each decision a blade that cut deeper into our flesh. "I remember," I whispered, feeling the warmth of Gareth's blood seep into my hands, a stark reminder of what had been lost, what had been sacrificed. I remember, the sky darkened, shadows stretching long across the battlefield. Above us, the stars blinked awake, indifferent to our plight, the cosmos an eternal witness to the folly of man. I felt a surge of rage, a burning desire for justice. The decisions of the nobility echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain. They would pay, I promised myself as I looked at the fallen, at the lives intertwined with mine. They would pay for every moment stolen, for every dream crushed beneath their boots. And in that spirit, I rose, the weight of the world still heavy on my shoulders, but now there was a flicker of determination burning within me. I couldn't let Gareth's sacrifice be in vain. I would fight for more than just the battle, I would fight for the souls that had been lost, the dreams that had been buried in the dust of the battlefield. The nobles may have thought they held power, but they didn't know the depths of our resolve. I gripped my sword tightly, my heart pounding with purpose as I charged back into the fray, the cries of the fallen echoing in my ears. In that moment, I understood, the influence of the nobility had created a storm, but I was determined to rise within it, to become a force that would shake their foundations. For in the hearts of foot soldiers, beneath our battered armor, lay a fire that could not be extinguished. The air is thick with smoke, a rancid mix of gunpowder and sweat, and the ground trembles with the echoes of chaos. The scent of iron hangs heavy, a metallic reminder of the blood spilling on the earth, soaking into the fabric of history. I stand amidst it, heart pounding, flesh quivering, alive and yet so close to death. My eyes dart across the battlefield, where shadows dart between the ruins of what once were homes, now twisted skeletons, reminders that we are nothing but ghosts in a dance of war. Thomas, my comrade, stumbles beside me, his breath ragged, his face smeared with filth and despair. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he gasps, the words escaping like a prayer. He clutches the weapon that feels more foreign than familiar. A rifle, a beast of metal and noise, had replaced the comforting heft of a sword. The very tools designed to protect us have turned into harbingers of our demise. I remember when warfare was a clash of steel, a duel of honor. Now, it is a symphony of disarray, a cacophony where bravery falters beneath the weight of innovation. "Just keep moving," I whisper, but my voice trembles. I recall the days when we exchanged banter, when the worst threat was the occasional brawl in a tavern, not the specter of annihilation lurking around every corner. The laughter, how distant it feels now. My heart aches for those moments, the mundane joys that now feel like echoes from another lifetime. Ahead, a figure emerges from the smoke, a soldier, but not a man of flesh and bone. Instead, he's a silhouette of dread, a harbinger of the new age. Drones pulse overhead, mechanical creatures that feast on the souls of the unwary. I close my eyes and breathe in deeply, the acrid taste of fear coating my tongue. I remember the tales of knights, their armor gleaming under the sun, their names whispered with reverence. But now, we are mere pixels on a screen, controlled by hands far removed from our grim reality, ensnared in an invisible web. "Look out!" Thomas shouts, yanking me back just as a projectile whirs by, a reminder that death has become a game of precision, a science devoid of honor. My pulse quickens, and the world narrows. I'm trapped in a moment, each heartbeat a countdown, each breath a prayer. "We're just fodder," I murmur, the truth sinking deep into my bones. What happened to valor? To courage? It's a relic, buried beneath the machinery of progress. And then there's Eliza, the woman I never dared to love, now a specter haunting my memories. She fought not with a sword but with words, rallying the spirits of the fallen. I see her in flashes, her fiery gaze, the way she wielded her voice like a weapon sharper than any blade. She believed in something greater, but now, as the ground shakes beneath our feet, I wonder if hope is just a mirage, shimmering yet unattainable. I remember her laughter, how it cut through the despair like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But the shadows are relentless, and I can almost hear her voice, echoing in the chaos around me, "Fight for what you believe in." Yet belief falters, and as the sound of gunfire fills the air, I feel the fraying of my resolve. Each shot reverberates through my skull, a drumbeat of dread. I see Thomas, eyes wide, as a nearby explosion sends dirt and debris spiraling into the air, creating a grotesque dance of destruction. I reach for him, but he's already lost in the tide, swept away by the relentless surge of war. My heart lurches as I scream his name, but my voice is drowned by the roar of machinery, the cacophony of a world turned inside out. The battlefield is a graveyard of dreams, where the ghosts of forgotten heroes linger in the smoke. I remember the stories, the brave warriors who faced their fate with a sword in hand. But now, the soldiers march under the weight of technology that promises safety yet delivers ruin. Our lives are reduced to mere statistics, numbers on a ledger, sold as collateral for someone's ambition. The heart of warfare, its passion, its fury, has been replaced by cold calculations, a game of chess where only the pawns bleed. I turn, searching for Eliza, for hope, for something to cling to. But she's somewhere out there, perhaps marching to a different beat, or buried beneath the rubble of what once was. I feel her absence like a phantom limb, an ache that won't subside. There's an eerie silence in the chaos, a moment where time stretches thin, and I can hear the ticking of a clock, its steady rhythm mocking the fragility of our existence. "Fall back," shouts a voice from the shadows, and I feel the instinct to obey. But I hesitate, caught between the pull of survival and the need to resist the erosion of what we once were. I glance at the faces around me, a fear reflected in their eyes, a shared understanding of our doomed struggle. We are soldiers, yes, but we are also human, tangled in the web of our own making, each of us a thread woven into a tapestry of anguish. The air grows colder, the shadows stretch longer, whispering secrets of the night, and I am left standing on the precipice. The world spins around me, a kaleidoscope of violence and despair, but I can't help but feel the flicker of something, a spark lingering just beneath the surface. It's a fragile ember, teetering on the edge of oblivion, whispering that maybe, just maybe, we can shape the future even as the past crumbles. And then, the moment breaks like glass, an explosion, followed by a silence so profound that it feels like the universe holds its breath. I'm left staring into the void, into the abyss where courage and fear collide, and I know the struggle is far from over. As I breathe in the acrid air, I clutch my weapon tighter, feeling the weight of history on my shoulders. We are warriors, and even as the nature of warfare shifts beneath our feet, we'll fight, we'll exist, and we'll remember. The night sky split open, a jagged tear of lightning illuminating the barren field. The air thickened with the metallic scent of rain and desperation. I stood there, heart hammering like a wild animal seeking freedom, watching my comrades fall into the mud beneath the weight of their own fear. A gunshot rang out, and the sound shattered the silence, echoing in my ears like a ghost's wail. I felt its vibration in my chest, a message, a warning. "Run!" Ethan's voice cut through the chaos, raw and frantic, igniting something within me. He was my brother in arms, a steadfast beacon in the endless dark. But in that moment of madness, his face twisted in terror, I saw the truth. Desire and dread wrestled within me. Was it cowardice to flee? Was it bravery to face the inevitable? I couldn't tell where valor ended and madness began. The rain poured down in sheets, drenching the earth, turning it to a slippery graveyard. I glanced at Ethan, whose eyes spoke of a shattered resolve, a flicker of hope snuffed out by reality. I knew his dreams, the family he longed to protect. I remembered the laughter we shared over rations, the late-night whispers of what life could be after the war. I remembered his mother's worried face, the way she clutched his photograph as if it were a talisman. And I remembered my own, her hands trembling as she folded my uniform, pressing it to her chest as if it were a lifeline. "Please, don't leave." Ethan's voice broke the spell, desperation spilling over. "Don't do this. Don't be a coward." That word hung in the air, heavy like the rain. Coward. A dagger of stigma that cut deeper than any bullet. I felt it sting, and it burned. Wasn't it cowardice to stay, to face a senseless death? My heart raced, each thud a war drum echoing in my ears, the symphony of fight or flight. I could run and never look back. But then there was Sam. He stood not far from us, eyes wide, scanning the chaotic horizon as if searching for a miracle. He was younger than us, barely out of his teens, yet here he was, surrounded by the weight of men's war. I could see his trembling hands, the way they clutched the gun like it was a life raft. "I can't do this," he muttered, voice quaking, barely above a whisper. "I can't. I want to go home." And just like that, the choice expanded before me, a dark chasm filled with echoes of lost dreams. Do I stay and fight beside Ethan and Sam, or do I choose the path of my own salvation? My breaths came in ragged gasps, swirling with the scent of damp earth and fear. Each heartbeat echoed louder, a countdown to the irrevocable. "Please, don't leave me," Sam begged, his voice breaking like fragile glass. Tears glimmered in his eyes, and I saw the reflection of my own childhood, days spent dreaming of heroism, of honor, of being someone worth remembering. But memories can be cruel, twisting moments into something unrecognizable. I wanted to be brave, but bravery felt like shackles weighing me down. "I can't do this," I whispered, unsure if it was an apology or a revelation. "I can't." "Then run," Ethan urged, raw and fierce. "Run if you have to. Don't let them kill you." And there it was, the divine permission in his desperation. With one look back, I took a step toward the abyss, heart racing, feet slipping through the mud. I ran. The world blurred around me, the darkness swallowing me whole, but within, inside my chest, the war raged on. Shadows whispered, taunting me. "Coward! Coward!" I could feel the weight of their judgment as I sprinted, heart pounding, gasping for air. I stumbled, but the thought of their faces, of their hatred, drove me forward. I was breaking free, yet I was shackled by the chains of their voices, of their lost hopes. I ran until the echoes faded into the night, but I could never escape myself. The trees closed around me, their gnarled fingers reaching out, whispering secrets of those who had come before. Each rustle of leaves was a reminder of the unending cycle, those who fought, those who fell, and those who fled. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their judgments pressing down like 1,000 bricks. In the distance, I heard the steady, relentless sound of gunfire. It resonated like a heartbeat of a dying world, a reminder of what I had left behind. I stumbled upon a clearing, breathless, the moonlight spilling onto my face like a cruel spotlight. I was alive, yet I felt dead inside, adrift in a world of shadows and silence. And then came the memories, Ethan's laughter, Sam's trembling hands, the warmth of a mother's embrace. Would they remember me? Would they curse my name? I touched the fabric of my uniform, a reminder of the dreams I wore like armor. But now, it felt like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. "Coward," I whispered to the night, my voice a ghost. And even as the word left my lips, I knew it wasn't just a label, it was a haunting echo that would follow me endlessly. I kept running, not knowing where the path would lead me, yet desperate to escape the weight of my choices. The world blurred again, time stretching like a taut wire. I could feel the boundaries of my heart breaking, splitting open like the sky above, and somewhere in the depths of my soul, I knew this was just the beginning. Each heartbeat, each breath was a step into the unknown, and I was terrified of what I might find. In that desolate moment, I let the rain wash away the shame, the fear, the sorrow. I ran until the horizon swallowed me whole, a figure lost in the shadows, a silhouette against the cruel tapestry of fate. What awaited me on the other side? I had no idea. But as long as I could still feel the pulse of life, I would keep moving forward, into the darkness, into the light, into the unknown. The night was swallowed by a thick, suffocating fog, the kind that wraps its tendrils around your throat and squeezes. I remember the sounds, the crackling of distant gunfire, the staccato bursts echoing like the heartbeat of a dying beast. I was there, crouched low in a trench, the earth cool and damp beneath my fingers, mud mingling with the blood that painted the landscape of war. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drum calling me to remember. It was chaos. The world exploded in a cacophony of shouts, the cries of men echoing like phantom whispers of the fallen. I could taste fear on my tongue, sharp and metallic, mingling with the smoke that hung in the air like a spectre waiting to claim its next victim. I was not alone. Beside me, Private Lucas, a boy with dreams as big as the sky, clutched his rifle, knuckles white, eyes wide with terror. He was just 17, barely a man, yet thrust into this abyss. I remember his voice, trembling yet somehow defiant, "We'll make it. We just need to hold the line." But the line broke. The enemy surged forward, shadows moving through the fog like nightmares come to life. I watched, helpless, as Lucas was pulled under, his screams swallowed by the night. The last thing I saw was his terrified face, wide and pleading, before the darkness took him. I remember every heartbeat of those final moments twisting in my chest. I ran. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, each footfall a frantic plea for salvation. But the enemy was upon us, and soon I found myself in their grasp, cold hands pulling me into the abyss of captivity. I was no longer a soldier, I was a prisoner, stripped of dignity, reduced to a number, an echo of a man who once stood proud. The cell was a dark hole, the air thick and rancid, heavy with despair. I shared the space with men broken in spirit, shadows of their former selves. I remember the way they looked at me, eyes sunken, haunted by memories they wished to forget yet couldn't escape. Corporal Mason, a grizzled veteran with a heart that still beat for love, sat against the cold stone wall, muttering prayers that fell like ash to the floor. He had a daughter, he told me, a girl with laughter so pure it could light the darkest corners of hell. But here, hope was a cruel joke, a flickering flame snuffed out by the brutal hand of reality. Days bled into nights, a cruel cycle of hunger and darkness. We were fed scraps, barely enough to keep the ghosts of our stomachs from howling louder than the cries of our souls. I remember the taste of stale bread, the way it stuck to the roof of my mouth like memories I had tried to bury. Time blurred, each moment stretching on forever, yet slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. We stood in line, shivering in the bitter cold, waiting for our rations. I remember the guards, their eyes cold and void of humanity, faces obscured by shadows. They wielded their power like weapons, laughing as they tormented us. "You're nothing now. Just a dog on a leash," one of them sneered, his breath hot against my face, a reminder of my helplessness. I felt the anger rise in my throat, hot and bitter, but it was Mason's voice that steadied me, a low whisper that brushed against my mind like a balm. "Don't let them take your spirit. They can bind our bodies, but our souls," he trailed off, eyes distant, as if he were searching for something beyond the prison walls. "Remember who you are." I remember. I remember the nights filled with nightmares, haunted by the faces of those I had lost, their cries echoing within me, a living testament to the horror of our existence. I dreamed of home, a place that felt like a distant star, out of reach, yet shining bright in the depths of my despair. And then, one cold morning, the world shifted again. The guards were restless, their whispers laced with fear. Something was happening outside our walls. I could feel it, a tremor of hope creeping into the cracks of our prison. The air buzzed with the promise of change, electric and alive. I glanced at Mason, his eyes glimmering like shards of glass, reflecting a flickering flame of hope. "Today," he said, voice trembling. "Today is different." It was chaos, a sudden eruption. The sound of distant explosions thundered like a storm breaking through the stillness. I remember the adrenaline rushing through my veins, the thrill of something more than just survival, the taste of rebellion on my tongue. The prisoners began to stir, hearts racing, minds ignited with possibilities. But freedom came at a price. The guards transformed from overseers to beasts, rage etched on their faces. Back in line, they roared, but we were no longer animals to be herded. We surged forward, a tide of humanity desperate to reclaim what was lost. I remember the rush, the pounding of feet on the cold ground, the weight of bodies pressing against me, exhilaration mingling with terror. We were more than soldiers now, we were ghosts rising from the ashes, ready to reclaim our lives. And then, I lost Mason in the chaos, his voice swallowed by the storm of bodies and cries. I reached out, searching for him, for that glimmer of hope he had ignited within me. But the world spun, and I was carried away, a leaf in the tempest, lost but somehow still alive. I remember the darkness closing in again, but beneath it, a flicker, hope, defiance, the relentless beat of my heart echoing in the silence. Who would I be when the dust settled? A soldier, a prisoner, or a ghost? I didn't know, but even in the grip of despair, I felt the stirrings of something else, something stronger than fear. As I stumbled forward, breaking free, the line between captivity and freedom blurred, and all that remained was the raw pulse of existence, echoing through the chaos, refusing to let me forget what it means to fight. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. It clung to the soldiers like a second skin, a suffocating shroud of terror. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. My breath came ragged, a whispered prayer over the chaos. I crouched low, feeling the dirt beneath my fingernails, the grit of the earth mingling with the sweat trickling down my back. The world had narrowed to this moment, a shattered landscape where dreams and nightmares collided. I remember the echoes of laughter from the barracks, the distant memory of camaraderie before the front lines turned our brotherhood into a fraying rope. It was supposed to be an adventure, but adventure had transformed into a cruel joke, a ghostly spectre haunting us, mocking our naivete. I glanced at Thomas, his eyes wild, reflecting the flames of the battlefield. He was just a boy, 21 at most, with a crooked grin that once could charm even the hardest hearts. Now, terror had carved deep lines into his forehead, and the laughter had vanished like smoke, lost to the wind. "Do you think they'll write about us?" Thomas asked, his voice barely cutting through the cacophony of gunfire. I could see the flicker of hope clinging to his words, the desire to be more than the mud and blood beneath our feet. "Heroes, like in the stories," he continued, clutching his rifle, fingers shaking as he tried to maintain control. I wanted to reach out, to tell him the truth that burned in my throat. They wouldn't write about us. Not really. They'd write about the glory, the victory, the noble sacrifice. But what of the mud caked on our boots? The shattered bodies? The screams that haunted our dreams? The world spun, a dizzying blur of violence and chaos, and just like that, it was upon us. A flash of light, a thunderous roar. I ducked instinctively, feeling the heat brush past my cheek as death whistled by. The ground shook, and somewhere in the distance, I heard a gut-wrenching scream. It wasn't heroic. It was raw. It was real. "Focus," barked Sergeant Hale, his voice cutting through the haze like a knife. He was a man forged from steel, but even steel bends under pressure. I had seen him collapse behind closed doors, nightmares spilling from his lips. "Stay sharp. We fight for our brothers. For the stories." Stories. The irony made me snort, and Thomas shot me a glance, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. The stories, the ones that had painted us as gallant knights, heroic in our sacrifice. Yet, as I looked into his eyes, I saw a boy who had learned too quickly that the battlefield was a graveyard of dreams. I remembered my sister's face, the way it lit up when I had promised her I'd be brave. "You'll be a hero, won't you?" she had squeaked, her innocence like a fragile bubble. I had wanted to shield her from the truth that I was more of a puppet than a warrior. The stories told of honor, but they ignored the blood that stained our hands. The next wave came crashing down, a wall of sound and fury. We advanced, but each step felt like a betrayal, each guttural cry echoing in my mind, a reminder of what was lost. I watched as Thomas fell, not to a bullet, but to despair. His eyes were hollow, reflecting the remnants of what had once been a youthful spark. He stumbled, and I saw the moment the stories left him. "Thomas!" My voice shattered against the chaos, a desperate plea. I reached for him, but the world had shifted, and he was lost in the tide of panic. "We'll be heroes, I promise." "But how? How do you promise heroism to a boy who's drowning in the dark?" I could feel my heart pounding like war drums, each beat a reminder of the fragile lines we walked. Honor, duty, valor, all words that meant nothing when blood turned the ground to mud. The battlefield was a theater, and we, the unwilling actors, were trapped in a script written by those who had never heard the roar of gunfire. I ducked instinctively as another bullet zipped past, the whistling sound a cruel harbinger of fate. I wasn't meant to be here. I wasn't meant to carry this weight. But here I remained, a soldier marooned in a sea of despair, battling for meaning. I remembered the stories again, the gallant soldiers who charged with courage, who faced death with a defiant smile. They were heroes, and we, what were we? I felt the creeping tendrils of darkness wrap around my soul, a cold embrace that whispered of futility. We were pawns on a chessboard, pieces moved by unseen hands. I looked back at the remnants of my squad, each face a blend of fear and resolve. They were heroes in their own right, held together by dreams painted in blood. And as I stood in that hellish landscape, I realized this truth: the stories that would be told would twist our truths into something palatable for a world that craved inspiration. They would enshrine our sacrifices but obscure our pain, the trembling hands, the haunted eyes, the ceaseless nightmares. I felt hollow, an emptiness echoing through my chest where hope once resided. The earth trembled again, and with it came the roar of artillery, a monstrous creature bellowing its fury. And in that moment, I felt a shift towards what we really were. We were the shattered remnants of youth, we were the heart-wrenching echoes of laughter mixed with sobs. I turned toward Thomas, who was still fighting against the tide of despair. "Listen," I whispered fiercely, gripping his shoulder. We're not just the stories. We're the silence that follows the screams. We're the blood on the ground and the heart that beats through it all. He nodded, eyes wide, the flicker of hope returning, not as a soldier's naive dream but as a truth forged in the depths of struggle. And as the shadows lengthened around us, something shifted in the air. A promise hovered, unspoken, between us. We would carry this moment forward, even in the face of oblivion. I could almost hear the clock ticking, the sound sharp against the backdrop of chaos, a reminder that time was not ours to command. And as I looked into the distance, the faint outline of the horizon beckoned, a cruel reminder of a world that would continue to spin, indifferent to our pain. And so we stood, two shattered souls in a world of chaos, the weight of the stories yet to be told heavy on our shoulders. We would be more than foot soldiers, we would be the truth buried beneath layers of propaganda, haunting echoes of a forgotten humanity. The night deepened, and the shadows whispered secrets. We were here. We were alive. But what would the world remember? The air is thick with the smell of wet earth and iron, heavy with the ache of unfulfilled dreams. A figure crouches amidst the chaos, mud streaking his face, his breath ragged like the torn banners fluttering above. He's one of the forgotten, a foot soldier whose name will never grace the pages of history, yet whose heart beats with the pulse of 1,000 unsung battles. The clash of swords and the cries of men echo around him, a cacophony that drowns out the whispers of regret. He knows, even as the enemy closes in, that his legacy isn't forged in glory, it's carved from sacrifice. I remember the quiet moments before the storm. The kind where you could almost hear the stars breathing, their distant light beckoning like a lover's call. Here's Thomas, a young man with dreams as vivid as the banners he once imagined flying over a castle he'd never see. He was not born into nobility, no, that was reserved for others, the ones who could afford to play kings and queens while the rest of them, sweaty, mud-caked, weary, served as their living chess pieces. There was a fleeting glimpse of home in his eyes, a mother's laugh echoing through the fields, a sister's hand slipping into his as they danced around the hearth. Now it's all gone, snatched away by the relentless march of war. Hold fast, the sergeant roars, but the sound seems like a joke, a cruel whisper against the growing din. Around him, men flinch, some clutching their swords as if they might find solace in the cold steel. He glances at Edward, his comrade, a giant of a man with a heart too tender for this world. Edward was the one who found joy in the simple things, a wildflower sprouting through a crack in the cobblestones, the laughter of children, the warmth of shared bread. But here, in this moment, those joys are stripped away, replaced by a primal fear that gnaws at their bellies. I remember the taste of bread, Thomas, Edward breathes, his voice cracking under the weight of grief. Not this muck we're eating now. Remember the honey. Thomas chuckles, but it's a hollow sound, a fragile thing. They both know that it's nothing but a dream now, a fleeting memory that evaporates under the hot breath of battle. It was sweeter than victory. They exchange a glance, and in that shared look, a lifetime of memories cascade, their laughter, the warmth of sunlight on their backs, the simplicity of being young, alive, and free. But outside this ephemeral bond lies the brutal reality of war, where dreams become corpses, memories decay like the bodies littering the fields. The clash begins, a symphony of chaos exploding around them. Thomas grips his sword, knuckles white, as he charges into the fray, adrenaline coursing through his veins like fire. Each swing of his blade feels like a prayer, a desperate plea to be remembered, to be more than just a face in a crowd. At that moment, he is not just a soldier, he is every foot soldier who ever fought and fell, each one echoing in his movements. Time bends and warps, and he barely recognizes the passage of moments. Every heartbeat is a countdown, every breath filled with the metallic taste of dread. The night sky swallows everything, humans become shadows, and the battlefield becomes a macabre dance of life and death. Fight, Thomas! Fight! Edward bellows, his voice a beacon in the haze. But as Thomas moves, he notices Edward faltering, his giant frame crumbling under the weight of despair. The fear is palpable, a living thing that wraps around their throats like a noose. Edward! The word breaks from Thomas's lips, a razor's edge of panic. But before he can reach, the chaos consumes his friend, an unseen force that tears them apart in an instant. the world narrows to a single horrifying truth: loss. Thomas finds himself stumbling backwards, the battlefield spinning in a sickening dance. He falls to his knees, the ground beneath him soaked with the residue of life and death, the air thick with the screams and silence of those who fought and fell. "I remember," he whispers, trembling hands clutching the earth, "I remember a day when I thought I could be someone important. But the ghosts of history are cruel, mocking him with every breath." And then, in the quiet in-between moments, when the world holds its breath before the next wave of chaos, he feels Edward's presence surrounding him, like a ghost of a friend, a reminder of what they had fought for: laughter, freedom, and the fleeting joy of living. It is a bitter sweetness, a blend of hope and despair. The conflict rages on, each clash of steel echoing like a heartbeat, each cry a reminder of mortality. And as shadows creep over the battlefield, Thomas remembers what it means to be human, to fight, to bleed, to dream. There is no glory here, only a legacy forged in blood and sorrow. The foot soldiers of the 100 Years' War, forgotten by the annals of history, remembered only in the whispers of the wind that carries their stories. How will they remember us? He asks the stars, his heart heavy with the weight of unfulfilled dreams. But the stars only shine, indifferent to the chaos below. They are timeless, cosmic, while he is but a fleeting moment, a breath caught in the tide of history. "I will not be forgotten," he vows, his heart a drumbeat against the night, a pulse that refuses to fade. And in that moment of despair and defiance, he stands up, blooded yet unbowed. Legacy is not written in victories, but in the hearts of those who remember, who fight to keep the stories alive. As the battle rages on, the echoes of the past intertwine with the present, each foot soldier immortalized in the hearts of those who dare to remember. Thomas grips his sword tighter, the echoes of his comrades urging him forward into the dark unknown. Their stories will live on, etched into memory like the scars they bear. And as the cry of war envelops him once more, he knows this is just the beginning, an unending cycle of loss and remembrance. The night stretches on, filled with ghosts and memories, as the battle continues to rage, an eternal testament to the human spirit. A reminder that while they may not be carved into stone, they live on, forever entwined in history's relentless march. The sound of gunfire ricochets off the jagged walls, a sharp crack that slices through the air like a knife through flesh. Smoke fills the narrow street, swirling, choking the breath from lungs that feel like they're on fire. I stand there, clutching my rifle, heart pounding, each beat a thunderous reminder of the life I once had. I remember the taste of dust on my lips, the metallic tang of fear mingling with the acrid scent of burnt earth. This is my reality now, a world where shadows dance in the corners of my vision, where every corner holds a specter of uncertainty. Next to me, Matthews is crouched low, his face a mask of grit and determination. I see the tremble of his fingers against the barrel of his weapon, just a flicker, but it's enough to bring to mind the times we laughed before this hell. "We'll be fine," he'd said with that crooked smile, full of bravado, before we stepped into this nightmare. But now, all I can think about are the letters he keeps tucked away, frayed edges, ink-smudged, words of love that feel like a weight pulling him back to a life he can't reach. He's here, but part of him is still at home, weaving dreams in the quiet of a summer night. A distant explosion shakes the ground, and I feel the tremor deep in my bones. I remember the first time I heard a blast like that, how it made my stomach turn and my heart race. But now, it's just another sound in the symphony of chaos. We've become accustomed to this madness, haven't we? We wear it like a second skin, a shroud that wraps around our souls. I look at Matthews. His eyes are wide, haunted, he's seen too much, just like me. Just like all of us. The night is thick with tension, a darkness that feels alive, pulsating like a heartbeat, like the clock ticking down to some inevitable doom. I search the shadows, half expecting to find ghosts lurking there, reminders of brothers lost, faces I can't shake from my memory. I remember their laughter echoing in my mind, and it feels like a cruel joke, a reminder of what's been stolen from us. We carry their ghosts with us, and they weigh heavy on our hearts. Another shot rings out, and I duck instinctively, adrenaline surging through me like a wild beast. The fear is a constant companion, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. "Keep your head down," I shout to Matthews, whose eyes dart around, searching for the enemy, for salvation. But what are we fighting for? Freedom? Honor? Or merely survival in a world that seems intent on swallowing us whole? I wonder if we'll ever find peace again, or if the echoes of this war will follow us into every conflict we face, shadows that dance just out of reach. I remember the days before the war, when we were boys playing soldiers, our imaginations running wild with dreams of heroism. The world felt infinite then, bursting with possibilities. But now? Now, we are but dust in the wind, fragmented pieces of a shattered mosaic. I watch as Matthew's resolve begins to crack. "We're not going to make it out of here, are we?" he whispers, the tremor in his voice betraying his facade of bravery. There's no heroism in this moment, just raw humanity stripped bare. I reach out, placing a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in this storm of fear. "We will," I say, but the words taste like ash on my tongue. I want to believe it, to infuse life into this dying hope, but I can feel the shadows closing in. I remember the last time I sat with my family, the warmth of their laughter, the safety of their love, a stark contrast to this cold, unforgiving place that had become my new reality. The thought is a ghost that lingers, taunting me with what I've lost. As the chaos rages, time stretches and snaps like a frayed wire. I can taste the bitterness of regret, the longing for a life unmarked by trauma. I remember watching the news, the endless lines of soldiers returning, their eyes empty, souls frayed. We are not just fighters, we are vessels of sorrow, carrying the weight of a war that never truly ends. We leave pieces of ourselves behind in every battle, fragments scattered across foreign lands like fallen leaves in an autumn breeze. Do you think it'll ever stop? Matthews asks, his voice barely a whisper, like a prayer. I want to tell him it will. I want to promise him that the nightmares will fade, that someday he'll find peace. But the truth hangs heavy between us, a wall of silence that suffocates. I remember my father's stories, how he spoke of valor and honor, and I wonder if he ever considered the price paid by those caught in the storm. We fight for ideals, but what of the men we become? The sun sets, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield, the dying light spilling like blood across the ground. I remember the warmth of home, the laughter of children playing, joy untainted by the horrors of war. But here, that innocence feels like a distant memory, a dream that slips through my fingers. I glance at Matthews, his eyes reflect the last glimmers of hope, but I know the truth. The world is a cruel place, and we are mere pawns in a game played by unseen hands. Stay close, I urge him, my voice laced with urgency. But even as I say it, I know the futility. The war has changed us, carved deep lines into our souls, left scars that will never heal. We are warriors, yes, but more than that, we are survivors, navigating a landscape littered with ghosts, memories of laughter, of love, of brothers lost. Another explosion shakes the earth, and I can't help but think of the future, of how we'll carry this burden onward, how the ghosts of our past will haunt us in the conflicts yet to come. Matthews and I are bound by more than blood, we are entwined in a shared trauma that binds us together, a bond forged in fire and fear. I glance at him, and in that brief moment, I see the reflection of my own heart, fragile, battered, yet somehow still beating. As the echoes of the war fade into the distance, I know this is just one chapter in a never-ending story. The lessons we learn here will follow us, shaping our lives in ways we can't yet comprehend. We are the common soldiers, the forgotten ones, and though the battles may change, the essence of what we carry, the fear, the heartbreak, the ghosts, will remain. In this moment, amidst the chaos, I find a sliver of resolve. We fight not just for survival but for the promise of a tomorrow that may be better, a tomorrow where the weight of our experiences can find meaning in the scars we bear. I close my eyes and take a deep breath, ready to face whatever comes next, to stand shoulder to shoulder with my brother in arms, and carry on, even as the shadows stretch long into the night.